Stranger Things. Season 5 is just around the corner, and so we thought it would be an awesome idea to visit the comics that depict the events between various seasons and give us more information on how things came to be. Whether this means fleshing out Russian ties to Hawkins or visiting the Upside Down alongside Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo and Donatello, the comics have it all. So sit down, grab some popcorn and let's dive straight into it. Stranger Things. The Other Side, issue number 1, A Sliver of Hope. Will Byers was a lot of things. A good friend, a wise wizard in his Dungeons and Dragons campaign, a great son and more, but what he wasn't was a fighter, something he was being forced to be right now. Minutes ago, Will was at his friend Mike's house playing a Dungeons and Dragons game, part of an adventure party in search of treasure and glory. But right now, Will is fighting for his life, running away from a monster that could have only belonged in his nightmares in the real world. He rushes into the shed in the back of the house and grabs the old hunting rifle hanging on the wall. As Will struggles to load and cock the rifle, he is reminded of the battle in his Dungeons and Dragons campaign, the one where Will the Wise's arcane tricks weren't enough to keep him alive. This is when the light bulb in the shed begins to glow brightly until it completely blinds him. When the bright flash subsides, Will finds himself in a strange new world, one where everything is the same and yet very different. Everything is covered in slime, organic matter, alien spores, and alien vines. As for the monster that was following Will, it is now outside the shed as Will struggles to stand up. For the uninitiated, this is the Upside Down, an alternate dimension in parallel to the human world, where everything is replicated from the real world, but it has been overrun by alien flora and fauna. This is the homeworld of the monster haunting Will, the Demogorgon, and it snarls furiously before attacking Will as the latter is reminded once again of the game with his friends, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas. It was a pivotal moment in the campaign. Lucas wanted him to go on the offensive, while Dustin wanted him to play it safe by casting protection. In that moment, Will could choose. He could ponder and weigh his choices. But right now, in this moment, all Will can do is act as 1,000 teeth embedded in the creature's mouth lunge towards him while being flanked by talons as sharp as steel. Will stumbles backwards, looks away, but thankfully manages to pull the trigger. The gun fires, and the very next second, Will finds himself completely alone in the shed. The Demogorgon is gone, and all Will can register is the horrid smell of rotting carcasses emanating from all around him. Maybe he scared off the creature, or maybe he killed it. Either way, Will still can't let his guard down. He needs to find out more about this place. And so, carefully with hushed steps, Will heads back into what looks like his house from the real world and calls out to his mother and brother. No answer. He tries to turn on the lights, but there seems to be no power. Maybe the circuit blew when that light bulb grew brightly in the shed. Will can only speculate and hang on to hope as he makes his way into his room. Maybe Mom is working late again, and maybe Jonathan is out with his camera once again. Everything is fine, and they will surely return anytime soon, and once they do get here, they will know how to handle the monsters. With these thoughts, and more reassuring his rabid heart, Will takes a seat on the floor in front of his Jaws poster, and this is when his adrenaline finally starts wearing away. He may not be safe, he may not be home, but thankfully for Will, his body forces him to rest, and while resting, he dreams of his friends once again. This time, he is reminded of the time they all learned an important lesson. You can't re-roll for characters. You can't re-roll for events. The dice decide your fate, and fate had already spoken. Their party had been formed, but Lucas and Dustin were busy being solo adventurers while blaming Will for everything bad that happened to them. Oh, and I almost forgot. If you have liked the video thus far, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvellous long reads. And now, let's continue. So, Mike had to remind the 2 of them that they were a party. Together, they were stronger, because this wasn't a strength test. This wasn't a killing competition. This was an adventure. This was about survival, which meant you either survive as a party or die alone. And this is when Will wakes up in the Upside Down and starts to realise that this may be a different world than his own. The stench of death still still surrounds him, and something seems to have infected what looks like his home. Will begins to be affected by whatever infects this place and starts coughing, and this is when he decides that he needs to find someone in order to survive whatever this place is. There has to be a way out, and so he decides to leave his house. His flashlight doesn't work when he tries to turn it on, and this is when he concludes that this place seems to consume light as if it's food. He remembers seeing someone in Mirkwood while returning from Mike's place, and he decides to try his luck there. As he does so and makes his way into the woods, Will sees a light for the first time in this place near his makeshift fort, and with the light comes a voice that Will has never heard before. But surprisingly, the voice is calling out his name, and when Will follows it into the light, he encounters 11 for the first time. She looks corporeal, as if she isn't really there, and her mysterious presence reminds him of how dungeon masters would craft and place certain NPCs in the fictional world to help the players on their adventure. Like the spirit of the woods, for example. Something 11 seems to be right now, but by the time Will finally decides to reach out to her, 11 vanishes into thin air. Will leaps and tries to reach out, but 11 is long gone. He can still hear her voice though, and she says, "Will Byers? Will, where are you?" And he finally screams, "I'm right here!" But unfortunately, she can't hear him. Will weeps and makes his way back to the house. In the house, he tries to reach his mother and brother through the TV, but he soon realizes that just because it worked in a movie doesn't mean it would work in the real world. He then remembers something important, walks back into his room, and then bends down to reach under his bed. He soon finds what he had been looking for, his supercom, a walkie-talkie he used in the real world to keep in touch with his friends. This is the first bit of good news Will has ever had since he arrived in the Upside Down. Will quickly turns it on and says, "Hello, this is Will Byers. Can anybody hear me?" And to his surprise, minutes later, he hears his mother's voice reaching out to him, and though Will tries to call out to her, seconds later, the door to his room is flung open by the monster that had been chasing him. The Demogorgon snarls and sniffs the air as Will desperately hides behind his bed while desperately trying to drown out his mother's voice by covering the supercom. Stranger Things, The Other Side, issue number 2, Run. Will is right now surrounded by a dark mockery of the world he once called home, and though he has somehow managed to get in touch with his mother through the supercom, this has also attracted the Demogorgon right back into his bedroom. Will hides behind the bed as his frantic mother continues to scream and yell over the radio. She heard Will momentarily, but she isn't sure if that was her son or someone messing with her. Joyce Byers is panicking, and while Will hides behind the bed to save his life, she continues screaming over the supercom. She wants to know who the person is on the other end and what they have done to her son. Will, however, has been emboldened by the voice of his mother. After all, it's the first familiar sight in this horrid world. He wants to fight back now, and as his mother screams over the radio to get back her son, Will decides he's going to attack the monster before it gets to him. Will places the supercom under the bed once again, rushes out of his hiding spot, grabs the rifle from the bed and takes aim as the Demogorgon snarls and speeds towards him. Before the growling monster can pounce on Will, he manages to pull the trigger multiple times. Flesh and blood are sent flying in every direction, that is, until the Demogorgon vanishes into thin air. Will doesn't realise it yet, but in his haste, he has wasted all the bullets he had at his disposal. And what's worse is the fact that the supercom is now dead. His mother is no longer at the other end. Will climbs to the roof of his house in an attempt to reach his mother, as he is reminded of the time when he first got his supercom. Even back then, the walkie-talkie didn't have enough range to keep him in constant touch with his friends from the comfort of his bedroom. Will then tries something else. He tries to contact his mother through the family phone, and though he is able to hear her voice for a few seconds, that too comes to an end when a sharp electrical surge destroys the gadget. Frantically, Will begins to run through the house and back to his bedroom where the supercom is, so as not to lose touch with his mother, but he fails to notice coloured lights following him every step of the way. He tries to reach out to her once again, and this is when the tape recorder turns on and Should I Stay or Should I Go from The Clash begins to play. The song is soft, muffled, as if the sound is coming from a different room, and this makes Will wonder if the song is actually being played by someone in his real bedroom. He tries to reach out to his mother once again, but this is when he hears the Demogorgon entering his house once again. Will checks his rifle, only to realise that he has no ammo, which leaves him with just one choice: hiding under the bed. He quickly crawls under it with his backpack and waits with bated breath. Thankfully, the creature never catches up to him, and this is when Will decides to go out into the town in the hopes of getting his supercom in range with another. Will gets out from under his bed, packs everything up, and then heads into town. But when he reaches the town square, he hears someone screaming for help, and this is when he is reminded of his Dungeons and Dragons adventure with his friends once again. Will remembers the time when he, Lucas, and Dustin had to prioritise rescuing a village full of people, even though they hadn't properly rested in a while. Will was out of spell slots, and Lucas was low on health, but then Mike had said something to them that held a lot of meaning for Will at this moment. Mike had said, "Figure it out, guys. Just remember, if you don't help them, then who will?" And so Will begins to sprint towards the screaming voice, which soon begins to call out to Mike's sister, Nancy. Will doesn't know it yet, but he's headed towards the Harrington house, where Barbara is currently being taken away by the Demogorgon. Will is hopeful. He wants to rescue whoever it is that needs help, but by the time Will reaches the house, the screaming has stopped, and eerie silence has once again taken over the entire town of Hawkins. He reaches the pool and tries to call out to whoever it was, but all he finds in the empty pool are Barbara's broken glasses. Will decides to head back to his house for a few hours, and this is when the Christmas lights from the other side begin blinking once again. Will, however, is too disheartened and disappointed to notice this. He simply slumps down on the ground with his head between his knees when, once again, he hears his mother calling out to him. Will replies back, reaches out to her, and, though he thinks she can hear him, it's just a coincidence, and the Christmas lights for now are allowing them to communicate. His mother wants to know if he's alive, if he's safe, and if he is, then where can she find him? Will diligently answers the first two questions, but when it comes to the third one, Will is as speechless as he was when he first laid his eyes on the Demogorgon. Where is he? What is this place? What is he supposed to say to his mother? And is it really a good idea to lead her to this horrid place in the first place? Joyce Byers, his mother, continues asking the same question again and again, desperate to find her son, but Will can't bring himself to answer her. This is when Joyce starts painting the alphabet on the wall, hoping that they would allow her to communicate with her son, and, to their surprise, this actually works. Every alphabet will touch in the upside down lights the corresponding Christmas lights on the other side, and Will immediately use this new ability to tell his mother that he's right here. After all, this is his house, his family room, and he is right beside his mother, yet somehow miles away. Joyce is as confused as Will by this response, because if he is right here, then why can't she see him? And this is when Will loses hope once again, and before he can come up with another way to communicate his location to his mother, he hears the Demogorgon once again. Will quickly uses the lights to tell his mother that he is running away, but when he looks back, he watches the Demogorgon open a portal to the other side. The creature is trying to enter his house once again, and this time to hunt his mother. Of course, Will can't allow that to happen, so he grabs a book from the bookshelf and chucks it at the creature. The Demogorgon turns around and roars at Will, who in response says, "Come and get me, buttface." Will then runs away desperately, hoping that the creature follows him and not his mother. Stranger Things. The Other Side, issue number 3, Sacrifice. The first page shows us Will hiding in the Hawkins cemetery. He is terrified of something, and the next few pages will show us how Will ended up here in the first place. A few hours ago, Will left his home to head to Mike's house. He was sure that his mother could hear him over the supercom, which is why he was hoping he'd be able to contact Mike if he was in range. However, upon reaching Mike's basement, Will heard static coming from his radio, and when the signal cleared up, he heard the news of his passing. The authorities had discovered Will's body on the other side, which is why Will had been officially declared dead. This breaks Will's heart, and he takes off running into the night once again. How could he be dead? How could they believe such a thing? After all, he talked to his mother just yesterday. Will rushes into his house and uses the lights to tell his mother that he isn't dead yet, but he gets no response. Frantically, Will tries to use the supercom again, and then the tape recorder, but apart from his mixtape faintly playing in the background. There is no response to his desperate pleas. Will eventually falls asleep and dreams of his Dungeons and Dragons campaign once again. This time, the memory once again reminds him why it's important for any adventuring party to stay together. And when Will wakes up, he is offered a sliver of hope in the form of his mixtape playing once again. This time, however, the sound isn't coming from his tape recorder, and when Will decides to follow it, he discovers that it is actually coming from a portal in his house that is still halfway open. Will punches at the portal, claws at it, and screams for his mother, and for the first time, his desperate efforts come through when he hears his mother's voice and sees a faint outline of hers in the portal. Will reassures her that he isn't dead, but before he can say more, he hears the Demogorgon coming for him once again. He tells his mother that he is being hunted, and when she asks where he is, Will does his best to describe the Upside Down to her. Will is desperate to go back to his mother and fails to notice that the creature is already in the room with him. Joyce, however, tells her son to stay strong. She promises Will that she will find him soon, but right now he needs to run away and hide. And so, before the creature can get to him, Will runs away, and the Demogorgon, it seems, is torn between entering the portal and following Will. This allows Will to hide from the Demogorgon successfully for the better part of the next day. He doesn't stay in one place for too long and eventually finds himself hiding in the cemetery. This is when Will hears someone praying nearby, and when Will follows the voice back to his house, he discovers that his father is fixing the wall on the other side, which, unfortunately for him, is also sealing up the portal. He tries to talk to his father, screams at him, begs him not to patch up the wall, but he doesn't listen to him, and so, moments later, Will's only true connection to his mother and his world is gone. Frustrated beyond his capabilities, Will finally breaks and has a mental breakdown. He weeps, grabs a chair, and then breaks it against the portal out of sheer frustration. He then gathers himself, and a few hours later, we find him wandering around Mirkwood once again. This is when he hears someone calling out to him for help, and when he turns around, he finds a man, bloodied and gored within an inch of his life, lying on the ground. Will doesn't know it yet, but this is Henry. He was out on a hunting trip with his friend Dale when the two of them were ambushed by the Demogorgon. Henry is aware that he is mortally wounded, which is why he doesn't want Will to help him. He wants Will to help Dale instead. Will doesn't really know what to do. He hasn't ever seen someone dying before, but Will knows what Henry needs, and so he promises the dying man that he will help find Dale and that they all will eventually make it home. This fallacy, this empty promise, is enough to reassure Henry in his last moments, and seconds later he passes away. Will is horrified by the blood on his hands and the death in front of his eyes. He doesn't know how to handle grief, and so he starts running away, and this is when he hears someone calling out to his brother, Jonathan. Realizing that this might be his chance to get out of here, Will takes one last look at Henry's body, apologizes to him, and then runs in the direction of the disembodied voice. As he does so, he stumbles upon the Demogorgon stalking his prey in the middle of the woods. Will then spots Mike's sister, Nancy, hiding behind a tree, and figures out that she too is being hunted by the creature. He then spots an open portal nearby, a portal from which Jonathan is urging Nancy to follow his voice, but Nancy is inches away from the Demogorgon, and Will knows that she won't be able to escape its clutches if he decides to go in first. And so, Will grabs a nearby rock, throws it in the opposite direction, and while the creature is distracted, Nancy bolts towards the open portal. Will throws another rock to keep the creature distracted, and once Nancy has left, he bolts towards the portal in the tree himself. Unfortunately, with every step, the portal grows smaller in size, and by the time Will reaches the tree, the portal has vanished. Will almost managed to escape this horrid place that now seems to be actively draining the life out of him. Stranger Things. The Other Side, issue number 4, Rescue. Will has been running for his life for the past few days, and now the Upside Down has begun to take its toll on him. A few hours ago, he had hope. He could talk to his mother, even see her faint outline through the portal, but all that had come to an end when his father fixed the wall in the real world. Now, as Will runs through the woods after having saved Nancy, he feels his breathing getting heavier. The air is getting harder to breathe. Will had hoped that he would have gotten used to this place place by now, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Will stumbles and groggily makes his way through the woods towards Mirkwood, completely unaware of his surroundings. And maybe that's for the good, because at one point he is only a few feet away from the Demogorgon as it feeds on Henry's flesh. As Will continues to walk, he gets weaker and weaker with each step, and soon his mind begins to create illusions to keep him going, and thus Will starts hallucinating that he has turned into Will the Wise and is on his way to Castle Byers. This gives Will enough strength to keep going, and he eventually passes out upon entering the castle. Minutes later, he is woken up by a familiar voice. It's the mysterious girl he saw earlier, one who knew his name, one whom Will would later come to know as 11. 11 tells Will to hang on. She tells him that his mother is on her way to rescue him, but Will is too weak to muster any kind of hope right now. His body has given up, and his mind is barely holding on, and thus all he can ask 11 to do is to tell his mother to hurry up and get here as fast as possible. He then passes out again, and we now see that thankfully Will has managed to make his way to his fort in the woods, and that he might have some sort of safety for a few minutes. A few hours later, when Will wakes up, he feels as weak as he did before. So to muster up some strength, Will begins to sing his favourite song, Should I Stay or Should I Go? This song gives him strength, and Will begins to slowly get up, but his voice also acts as a beacon that has attracted the Demogorgon. It leaps and bounds through the woods towards Will, and by the time Will realises that the creature is headed for him, it's already too late. Will watches in horror as the Demogorgon bursts in through the fort to finally capture the prey that has eluded it for the past few days. We then catch up with Will in his dreams. This time, he is dreaming about his time with Mike in the public library. Mike was reading The Dark Tower by Stephen King, hoping he could get some inspiration for their Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but he wasn't having any luck. Will had suggested that he talk to the librarian to find better books, and this had steered the conversation into the boys talking about their mother. Mike would shy away from such interactions because his mother would always end up using such discretion to sit down with the family and talk about Mike's feelings. For example, if he talked to the librarian, Miss Marissa, about horror fantasy books, she would tattle on him to his mother, which would cause her to stage a pseudo-intervention for him. This is when Will offers to take the Stephen King book to his place so that Mike can read it there, as his mum doesn't really care about this stuff, because lately she has been too busy. The conversation comes to an end, with Will realising that his mum does indeed love him, and that her being absent lately doesn't mean she is a bad parent, and Mike realising that Will only wanted to take the Dark Tower back to his place so that he could read it, to make sure that Will the Wise never dies in their Dungeons and Dragons campaign. This is when Will hears someone calling out to him, and when he wakes up, he realises that he is in the upside-down replication of the library from the real world, and that he is surrounded by decomposing dead bodies of the Demogorgon's victims. He has vines attached to his mouth, which allow him to converse with the hive mind, and thus he sees the dead bodies taunting him and mocking him by telling him that this is where he was always meant to be. He sees the huge creature in the sky of Upside Down, a creature that he and his friends would later come to call the Mind Flayer. Minutes later, Will is rescued by two people in hazmat suits, and to his surprise, one of them is his mother Joyce, who quickly saves him by removing the vine from his mouth. After this, Will doesn't remember anything except for waking up in the hospital while being surrounded by his mother and brother. They are ecstatic to see him alive and fine, and when Will wakes up, he asks them where he is. His mother and brother tell him that he's home, but Will still hallucinates that he is in the Upside Down, and instead of seeing his mother and brother as they are, they appear to him as decomposing bodies of their former selves. This vision, however, soon goes away the moment he touches his brother's hand, and minutes later, his friends, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas, barge in to make sure he's alright. Mike tells him that they made a new friend, and that this new friend helped stop the Demogorgon. She saved them all, but unfortunately, she too is gone now, and this statement makes Will wonder if it really is all over, if anyone can truly face the Demogorgon head-on and emerge from the encounter unscathed. Stranger Things 6 Issue number 1. The solution is isolation. It's 1970 and Francine is in the car with her mother as she frantically speeds down a lonely road in the middle of the woods. Her mother is worried because they are going to be late, which means that dinner will be delayed, and, to their dismay, Francine's father is a low-life, pathetic man who doesn't take kindly to delayed dinners no matter the cause. She sternly tells Francine that she will have to help out with dinner to make their father happy. However, this is when Francine screams for her mother to stop the car. Francine's mother slams on the brake and the car erratically comes to a halt. However, when she realises that there's nothing on the road to warrant this kind of reaction from her daughter, she begins to berate her. However, before she can slap Francine, her mother hears a huge loud crack as a tree slams down on the road in front of them. This is when little Francine says, "I told you, Mum, I told you," and her face is plastered with distrust and disgust for her mother, something that is replicated in the present day as we catch up with Francine in the Hawkins lab. It's 1978, and 8 years after learning about her abilities, Francine is now part of Dr. Brenner's project. She is currently trying to predict the outcomes of a repeated game of rock, paper, scissors between a pair of twins on the other side of the glass, as Dr. Brenner oversees the entire experiment. The outcome, however, is underwhelming, and Brenner isn't pleased. Statistically, Francine's best at predictions has been 17%, but today, the accuracy of her predictions is dipping below 15%. Dr. Brenner is disappointed, and he gaslights Francine by telling her that she is super special and that she should be doing much better. This reminds Francine of her home and how her father and mother's attitude towards her had changed once they had realised that she could predict the future. Her father would force her to predict numbers for the lotto draw, and every time her predictions didn't come true, he would storm into her room and berate her. Francine was a little girl, alone in the world, trying to keep up with school and the mountainous expectations of her father. But this mattered little to him, and just like Brenner in the present, he would gaslight and manipulate her by making her believe that he and her mother deserved better because they gave birth to her and raised her. Brenner then manipulates her into trying again, but when Francine says the same, he denies her request and walks out while reminding her that she chose to be a part of this program on her own volition, which is why he expects more from her. With Brenner's exit, we see 3 orderlies entering the room to escort Francine, and though she isn't tired, they remind her that it's protocol to rest after using her abilities. She then walks by the room where the other kids are playing, and when she questions why they get to play and unwind, she is reminded that they weren't a part of the trial. They simply assisted in it, and that Francine should stop asking more questions. Otherwise, she would upset Dr. Brenner. Francine then waves goodbye to Jamie and Marcy, but as she's walking back to her cell, she sees a familiar face, a face she never expected to spot in the Hawkins lab in her life. Francine misses a step, starts stuttering as she is reminded that she knows this man. He was there when her father finally won the lotto thanks to her, and they moved into a new and better house. It was 1976, and as Francine was helping her parents move boxes, Ricky, her new neighbour, offered to help her. Francine had greeted Ricky with an innocent smile back then, but today, right now, she greets him with a puzzled and angry expression, and these emotions soon turn into frustration and rage when Ricky tries to pretend that everything is okay. He tells Francine that he really missed her, but this is when she spots the number on his wrist and puts everything together. He's number 3, he's part of the program, and when he tries to explain himself, Francine cuts off the conversation by reminding him that in this facility, inside the lab, she is known as 6, and it would be better for him to call her the same and not to use her real name. She then angrily walks back into her room, slams the door, and then cries while facing the wall and demanding to be left alone. She then takes a seat on her bed and punches the bookshelf to get rid of her anger. But this is when she has a vision of the future. Her punch leaves a mark on the wood, and this mark slowly grows into an interdimensional tear, and when it's big enough, the hand of a Demogorgon rips through and reaches out for Francine, which sends her flying back in fear. However, Francine has had visions before, and she knows how to cover them up. After all, Brenner has a camera installed in her room. Francine pretends that she just punched a spider that was on the side of the bookshelf, and it seems that Brenner has bought her story. A few hours later, at dinner, Jamie and Marcy are busy testing their powers to heat the cold soup alongside Francine when Ricky decides to join them. Francine is clearly mad at him, and despite Ricky's pleas to have a conversation about their past privately, Francine confronts him in front of the twins. Ricky was a part of the program when they met for the first time, which tells Francine that this had all been planned from the start. Ricky, however, explains to her that he was simply protecting her, and no matter what she may say, she can't deny that this lab is the safest place for people like them. This is when Francine is reminded of her abusive household once again. It was 1977, and though her father and mother should have been content with winning the lotto once, their greed knew no limits. Her father and mother now wanted her to predict winning horses, and they were so disconnected from their daughter and her abilities that they thought picking winning names would be easier than predicting lotto numbers. Francine was naturally disgusted by her mother's attitude, and whenever such conversations happened, she would storm out of the house and spend some time at Ricky's place. By now, the two of them were together, and Ricky would do his best to comfort her. His parents too were quite understanding, and they would always allow Francine to stay for dinner. This was precious to Francine back then, but now that she knows that Ricky had always been a part of the program, she has begun questioning everything. She has begun to wonder if this lab really is the safest place for them. Ricky should know, after all, he's been here the longest. But when she poses this question to him, he tries to pacify her and patronize her, which prompts Francine to tell him that she's completely fine, all the while being haunted by the vision of the interdimensional tear that she saw a few hours ago. Stranger Things 6, issue number 2, War. We start the issue with Francine, aka 6, at the Hawkins lab in 1978. She is currently in a dark and cold void of the facility, which has been utterly destroyed. It seems to have been infected by some kind of alien vines, and when Six turns around the corner, a Demogorgon appears and scares her awake. Six doesn't know it yet, but she just had a vision of the Upside Down, and this is the reason why, instead of blaming the interdimensional threat, she blames her abusive father for such horrid nightmares. Six then wakes up and decides to spend some time reading in the library, but this is when Ricky decides to shoot his shot once again. After all, with the twins no longer here, maybe they can speak a bit more openly. Begrudgingly, Francine agrees. After all, she too wants to know about his powers, but she makes sure to call him 3 and not Ricky to make sure he remembers the distance between them. Ricky tells her that he can influence people, make them more susceptible to his suggestions, and make them trust him more easily. Francine naturally is furious after this revelation, and though Ricky tries to tell her that he never used his powers on her, how can she be sure? Francine then remembers Ricky asking her out to prom, and though they were having the time of their lives, things at Francine's home were worse than ever. She was having dinner with Ricky and his family more often than before, but this is when Francine stops reminiscing and lashes out at Ricky. Even if she believes what she says, even if she trusts his every word, he still lied to her. He lied about his family, himself, his association with the lab, and why he was there in the first place. Ricky tries to defend himself. After all, would Francine have really believed him if he told her that he was part of a secret government program that helped kids like them? This is when Francine tells him that she would have if he had tried. She then darts out of the library after throwing her book at him. On the way back to her room, she stops by to talk with the twins, Jamie and Marcy. Francine tries to coyly talk to them about the outside world, but sadly, the twins are too young to remember much. All they remember is the toy store, the dollhouse in it that they had always wanted, and the toys they got instead when they were told that the house wasn't for sale. This is when their conversation is interrupted by Dr. Brenner, who takes Francine away while ordering the twins to make sure they're ready for the upcoming experiment. He then chides Six for talking to the twins about the outside world, and though Francine tries to argue that they're just children and should be allowed to be kids, Brenner coldly reminds her that she doesn't know about their past or where they come from. This is when Francine is reminded of the fateful night she decided to run away from her home. It was the night of her prom, and her father was having a meltdown. He was screaming and lashing out at her for thinking she was too good for her parents. According to him, Francine needed to help them win more lotteries in order to repay them for all they did to help her grow up. He then began to question her style and commented on her dress, which is completely normal for prom, but to him, it's disgusting for some reason. He then started berating her for not having dinner with them anymore, and this is when Francine decided to stand up for herself. She mocked him for observing anything other than his bottle of alcohol, and this is when her father lost it. He growled in anger and raised his fist to hit her while calling her a freak, and this is when Francine realised that this wasn't her home anymore. She ran outside, grabbed Ricky, and explained to him that her dad had almost hit her and that they needed to go away. Ricky had understood, and thus the two of them had run away into the night. The way Brenna manipulates Francine's thoughts and circumstances against her in the modern day is eerily similar to some of what Ricky has said to her in the past. In the present, Brenna tells Francine about the twins' past. They too had an abusive household like hers, that is, until their house and family burned down on one fateful night. Jamie and Marcy were the only survivors, and they were brought into the lab at a very young age. Brenna then decides that it's time to show Six more of what the lab has been working on, and thus he takes her to observe 11, who is practicing her telekinetic abilities on houses made from playing cards. Six watches in astonishment as 11 brings down the house using her abilities, and this is when Brenna tells her that 11 too has a very tragic past. He also tells her that they aren't the only facility in the world that has a program like this. He tells her that there's a war coming, a war that he will do anything to win. Francine then remembers being at the diner with Ricky on the night of the prom. That was the night she had told him about her abilities, and that is how Ricky had implied that he might know people who could help her control her powers. In the present day, Francine says, "There are bad things coming, aren't there?" And Brenna instantly asks Francine if she has had a vision. Six, however, quickly corrects herself and tells Brenna that she has simply had a feeling about this for a while. A cold, bad feeling, like something terrifying is around the corner. Brenna thinks for a moment and then decides to show Six the new wing they have been developing in the lab. A wing designed to help Six and the others hone and amplify their powers. The wing will be ready in a few more weeks, and when it is, Brenna plans to change the world using it. Stranger Things 6, issue number 3, Breaking Point. And so the time has come. The new wing has been built in the Hawkins laboratory, and it's time for Francine to enter the sensory deprivation tank. But now that Six is here, seconds away from stepping into the tank, she is having second thoughts. Brenna reassures her that she won't be alone. They will all be here to monitor her, and Francine eventually gives in and steps into the tank. Once the process begins, she gets flashes of various images: waffles, Christmas lights, the display from an ECG, the Demogorgon, a furious Dr. Brenner, the lab in the Upside Down, a kiss, a doorway of light, floodlights, the twins, some sort of microorganism, and of course, blood. Six begins to panic once the vision ends, and so she is quickly pulled out of the water. Upon exiting, Brenner is excited to learn what Six saw, but all she tells him is that she had a vision about waffles. Maybe it's what they'll be served in the morning, or maybe she is hungry, but waffles are all she saw. Brenner, for the first time, loses his cool. He is furious, and his enraged face reminds her of the time her father had tried to force his way into Ricky's house in order to get her once she had run away. Ricky's mother had calmly turned him away by insisting that Francine wasn't with them, and once he had left, Ricky's mother used this opportunity to tell her about Dr. Brenner, a man who could supposedly help her in this situation, now that she no longer wanted to go back to her home. In the present, Brenner furiously throws his papers on the ground and angrily tells Six that he will get her something to eat. But after that, they will continue the experiment until they get the desired results. And so, thanks to Six, everyone gets to have waffles for dinner that night, and though everyone is enjoying themselves, Six isn't happy. When Ricky joins them, he tells them how Brenner is in a very bad mood today, and this is when Francine is reminded of her first meeting with Brenner, how calm and collected he had seemed, and how she had been convinced to become a part of the experiment at one of the lowest points in her life. After this, Six changes the subject and asks Ricky about the tank, and he tells her that because his powers rely on speech, they're still looking for a way to adapt the sensory deprivation tank to his ability. This is when the twins reveal that they too will get to go in the tank soon, and though Ricky and Francine are horrified by this revelation, the twins find nothing wrong with it. In fact, They revel in their abilities and look forward to growing them. After all, Dr. Brenner told them that they were special. 6 and 3 know what this means, and so, while she is being led back to her room after dinner, 3 uses his powers to send away the orderly so that they can talk in private. His plan succeeds. However, he ends up bleeding from his nose, which forces 6 to drag him to the bathroom so that he can take care of himself. Once inside, Ricky forces Francine to talk now that they are truly alone and away from the cameras, and she decides to open up. She tells him about the feeling she's had lately, how her gut knows that something bad is coming. This eventually culminates with the two of them once again getting closer to each other, which ultimately leads to their reconciliation kiss. The next day, Brenner brings them in to observe 9's trial session after 3's little rebellion yesterday. According to Brenner, Jamie is dedicated and loyal. She believes in the experiments, and it would be good for 6 and 3 to learn from her. 9 can use her powers to ignite objects, at least in theory, which is why she is currently trying to ignite some cotton balls that have been doused in gasoline. 6 finds this entire experiment to be too dangerous for a child, but Brenner reassures her that 9 is still too young to fully ignite fuels, and that this is just practice. However, to 9, this isn't practice. This is the time to prove herself, to prove that she is powerful, and to prove to everyone why she's special. 9 concentrates to her wit's end and has an intense stare down with the cotton in front of her, and this is when Francine has one of her visions. Francine sees blood dripping in a cold, black void, and she knows something bad is about to happen. She tries to get Brenner to stop 9 in time, but by the time she communicates her wishes, it's already too late. The lab tech accompanying 9 in the experiment begins to slam on the glass as all of the blood in his body reaches boiling temperature. 9 is bleeding from her nose and eyes, but she doesn't stop, not until she sees smoke coming from the cotton balls, and this is when she gives up and instantly passes out. We then catch up with all of them in the medical ward. Jamie is still unconscious with Marcy by her side, and 3 and 6 are having a meltdown in their own way. After all, these are just kids, and they shouldn't be going through this at such a young age. Brenner coerces the two of them into leaving the twins alone, and a few hours later, he decides to visit 6 in her bedroom. 6 knows what's coming, and though Brenner tries to pacify her, she gets him to talk and learns that for now, the theory is that 9's powers got out of control, which is why the heat she generated was attracted to the warmest part of the room, which just so happened to be their lab tech. 6 is hoping that she will hear the news of the program shutting down soon, but instead she gets a raw Brenner confessing that the program will continue operating, now with extra safety measures to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. Brenner thinks that 6 is worried about her safety, which is why he is constantly reassuring her that they will improve their safety protocols. However, 6 is able to see straight through his lies now, and, unfortunately for her, Brenner reads her expression rather well and changes the narrative. He tells 6 that if she had better control over her powers, if she had more of a handle on her visions, then she could have predicted what happened today much sooner, and this would have allowed them to save the lab tech's life as well as prevent 9 from being injured. 6 is taken aback by this, and though she believes him for a moment, she now also realises that Brenner is just like her father. He simply wants to manipulate her and exploit her powers for his own gain. And so, at breakfast the next day, she secretly passes a note to Ricky, a note that reads, "We're getting out of here." Stranger Things. 6, issue number 4, Changing the Future. It's the night before 6 executes her plan, and this time in her nightmares, she has a vision of the Upside Down once again. However, this time, as she navigates her way through it, a human figure wielding a gun with a Demogorgon's head bursts in through the door, and surprisingly, when 6 wakes up, she is not scared. Instead, she smiles because today is the day she is finally going to be free. And so at breakfast, she sits beside Ricky and tells him that today is the day they execute their plan. However, they soon run into a snag when one of the orderlies comes in to take 6 away after breakfast because Brenner has a session planned for her 30 minutes later. 6 tries to pretend that she isn't feeling that well, and though Ricky tries to back her up, the orderly doesn't budge. He simply assumes that the teenage lovers are looking for some alone time, and thus promises to get them some extra alone time after their sessions. This is when Francine decides to take matters into her own hands. She bites down on her tongue, spits out blood, and then pretends to have a seizure. This allows Ricky to make his getaway, and 6 ends up finding herself in the medical ward beside 9 a few minutes later. Marcy is still beside alongside her sister, and when Francine tries to talk to her, Marcy finally reveals her and her sister's real names to her. Turns out, the doctors don't expect Jamie to wake up from her coma, and this is when Marcy begins to weep because she doesn't know what she will do without her. Francine tells Marcy her real name and comforts her by telling her that she will take care of her. She then has Marcy lie down in the bed with her, and she hugs the kid tightly while reassuring her that everything is going to be okay. While asleep, Six once again has a vision of the future, the same one: waffles, Marcy, Christmas lights, and a door that leads to pure light. She wakes up from her sleep, tells Marcy about her plan, and then asks her to go and say goodbye to her sister. Struggling to keep her composure, Marcy does as she's told, and this is when the alarms start blaring in the facility. This is the signal, and once this happens, Francine quickly grabs Marcy and runs out of the medical ward. She uses her powers to predict the near future, and once she has a vision of a mysterious figure wielding a revolver, she quickly hides with Marcy in a nearby room. The mysterious figure is a woman, and she is looking for someone named Jane. Although both Marcy and Francine are curious, they can't waste this opportunity. The woman's sudden invasion of the lab is giving them a chance to escape, and Francine is going to take it. They soon encounter Ricky on the way out, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to get to the other kids before they were taken away by the orderlies. The three of them have no choice but to escape on their own, and Francine uses her powers to help them navigate the facility without being caught. She helps them avoid police officers, and eventually leads them to the door she has been seeing in her visions. However, this is when she stumbles and her nose begins to bleed, and though she knows she has been pushing herself a lot, Francine doesn't care, as long as it helps them escape. And escape they do. They walk through the door and emerge in the nearly empty parking lot of the Hawkins laboratory. However, before they can head off into the woods, they are held at gunpoint by the police officers and the woman searching for Jane. The orderly from the facility is also here, and he asks the officers to stand down once Ricky reminds him that Brenner would have their skin if anything happened to his precious subjects. However, this is when Francine has a vision of one of the officers losing his cool and shooting Ricky, and so Francine decides to gamble with her life instead and orders Ricky to run away with Marcy. As soon as they bolt, while Francine stands her ground with her arms in the air, just like in her vision, one of the officers pulls the trigger. Francine gets shot instead of Ricky, and with her last breath she orders him to run away and take care of Marcy. This is when Brenner rushes outside and, upon seeing Francine, he tells her that it didn't have to be this way, but Francine simply laughs and mocks Brenner. After all, she managed to finally do it. She changed the future. She changed what she saw in her visions. Francine passes away, and while Marcy and Ricky run into the woods, he promises to take care of the kid just like Six had promised. Stranger Things. Into the Fire? Issue number 1, Princess in the Tower. It's 1985, and we start the issue with a masked princess. She is trapped in a tower and is regularly fed medicines to keep the cold away. The princess can't understand the point of having the medicines every day. Can't they just turn up the heat in here? Can't they just keep her warm? After all these animals are supposed to be her friends. But when insisted upon, the princess takes her medicine as instructed. However, when the crow calls her a good girl, she says, "If I was, I wouldn't be here." We then catch up with Marcy in Boston. She is out with her friends, trying to live a normal life. She goes to school, has a crush on a boy named Josh, and has two good friends named Sarah and Dawn. They both help Marcy pick out a jacket that suits her, and their banter also reveals that Ricky still takes care of Marcy and that both Sarah and Dawn have a crush on him. Marcy leaves the store with a smile on her face, but when she gets home, she is frustrated to see that Ricky has already packed up and is ready to leave. Marcy doesn't want to leave. It's spring break and she wants to have a normal life, but Ricky has a new lead on 8, and considering their past, it's best if they stay on the move and don't stay in one place for long. Marcy storms away and locks herself in her room, but Ricky eventually manages to convince her. After all, he doesn't mean bad, nor does he want to hinder her life. He is simply looking out for her, and even though Marcy may not be the one with the powers, she still was a part of the program, which makes her highly dangerous to those who were running it. After all, Ricky had been in the program since he was a kid, and he knows if they can't control the kids with powers, they'd rather have them dead, just like they did with Six. Francine died to make sure they could escape, which is why they need to help any other survivors of the program that are still out there, now that it has been shut down. Marcy just wants a normal life, but she understands what Ricky's trying to say, and so that night, they load their van with all their belongings and leave Boston behind. By the next morning, they're in Hastings Glen, and this is where Ricky will will work his magic to explore his new lead. Ricky enters the local police station and uses his powers to charm the receptionist, which gives him access to the case files by pretending to be a reporter. As he goes through the file, he discovers that the perpetrators were wearing Halloween masks, and though the cops don't suspect it, Ricky is pretty sure that these were kids and that they had some connection to 8. The victim was one of the orderlies from the Hawkins lab, and though he doesn't want to, he understands why some of the kids might want revenge on people who did them wrong back then. Before he can read more, 2 officers enter the station, and Ricky is forced to make a quick getaway by charming them as well, using his powers. This clearly takes a toll on him. His nose begins to bleed, but by now, Ricky is used to this, and when he gets back in the car, he tells Marcy everything he has found. They decide to continue tracking down 8, and so, after a bit of asking around in a few towns, they eventually track her down in an abandoned barn in the middle of nowhere. However, as they approach it, they are quickly held at gunpoint by one of 8's friends, and this is when Ricky is forced to use his powers to de-escalate the situation. The man's name is Axel, and after being charmed, he nonchalantly leads them into their hideout. Soon, they meet up with 8's gang. However, as soon as 8 lays her eyes on Marcy, she instantly uses her powers to transform their surroundings and creates an illusion that depicts a fantastical forest with numerous animals. Everyone is taken aback by this, and this is when Marcy is forced to break it to 8 that she isn't Jamie. Jamie was the one with powers and the ability to burn things down. This is when Carly relaxes and tells Marcy that she thought she was Jamie, which is why she used her powers. She didn't want Jamie to burn down this barn, and this is when Marcy realizes that her sister is still alive. Not only alive, but also out in the world all by herself. This is when we see the masked princess again and learn that this is Jamie. Jamie yearns to be out there in the world. She yearns to leave the tower that traps her, but the tower also keeps her safe. It also keeps the world safe from her because thankfully, for now, she hasn't burned down this tower yet. This is when we see the bird in Jamie's delusions is actually a small flame in her hand that she is controlling in real life. Stranger Things, Into the Fire, issue number 2, Desperate Times, Desperate Measures. Carly is now telling Marcy and Ricky all she knows. The program that was touted to save them actually wanted to just use them. The woman who showed up on the day Francine managed to break them free was Eleven's mother. And though the 2 of them might have escaped, the rest of them were left trapped in Hawkins' lab to face Brenner's ensuing wrath. This is when Carly stops. She doesn't want to tell them more, and for once, Ricky is on her side. He doesn't want this to happen under the scrutiny of people he doesn't know, but Carly's friends are the ones she trusts, and Marcy is desperate to learn about her sister, and thus Carly, aka 8, reluctantly tells her all she knows. Marcy may have thought Jamie was as good as dead. They may have told her that she would never wake up, but that wasn't the case. Jamie did come, more powerful than ever, and this is when Brenner started to spin his web of lies. He told Jamie that Marcy escaped without her. He told Jamie that she left her behind, and this broke Jamie, so much so that it began affecting her powers and Brenner's experiments. This was unacceptable to Brenner, who saw the kids simply as a means to his own gain, and thus he assigned 8 to take care of Jamie. 8 started by giving Jamie something to live for. She started off by showing Jamie visions of a fantastical fairyland full of life and light, and for once, Jamie was happy again. Eventually, however, cracks started to show. Jamie was powerful and Carly was not, and so, one day, when Jamie tried to show her powers to the animals in the induced vision to keep them warm, Carly broke. The vision was swept away, partly because Carly was scared, and she was right to feel that way, because Jamie was lashing out and inches away from punching her the very next second. The animals in the induced visions were her friends, and Jamie wanted to make Carly bring them back. Carly shows this last meeting with Jamie to Marcy and Ricky, using her powers. This was the last time she saw Jamie, and she then goes on to comment on the facility and how it broke them all in one way or another. 11 suffered the same fate, though she seems to be doing much better now, and seemingly has close friends in Hawkins. Marcy and Ricky are surprised to learn 11's fate, but they are still desperate to find Jamie. And so, Carly sighs and eventually shows them her collection of the Hawkins Lab ID cards. This is what her gang uses to track down all those who wronged her and the other children years ago. And once they track them down, they make sure the technicians and doctors can't hurt any more children in the future. Ricky knows what this means, and Marcy knows what this implies. Neither of them wants to be a part of this, which is why when Carly hands over Dr. Morris's card to them, they quickly take it and part ways. As they leave, Carly gives them an invitation to join her gang if they ever feel like it, and Ricky and Marcy politely deny her request without burning any bridges. After driving out of town for a few miles, Ricky stops at a random payphone to contact a private detective who can help him track down Dr. Morris. And so, the two of them spend the next day or two waiting. Ricky, anticipating what's about to happen, and Marcy, haunted by her past. Through her memories, we learn that it was Brenner's MO to manipulate children, to gaslight them into thinking that he was their only saving grace, and that is exactly what he did with Jamie and Marcy once he rescued them. It's the reason why he allowed Marcy to stay at the facility, even if she had no powers. Ricky quickly realizes that Marcy is lost in the past, and thus he forces them both to enjoy some breakfast milkshakes to remind her that she is still doing well. Hawkins Lab is no more, and that she still has a life to live away from her past. Jamie, however, is growing more and more delirious with each passing day. She hates having to take daily medicines, and the allure of using her powers to cure all her worries grows stronger and stronger with each passing day. This delusion seems to somehow make its way to Marcy because, just like Jamie, she wakes up feeling cold the next morning. Ricky tries to talk to her about it, but Marcy plays it off as something that he doesn't need to worry about. This is also the fateful day of their meeting with Dr. Morris. Ricky's contact has finally gotten back to them, and so, a few hours later, we find them outside his house. They ring his bell normally, hoping to have a cordial conversation after they've introduced themselves, but when Morris opens the door, he is already pointing a gun at them. Morris isn't stupid. He knows what has been happening to people who worked at the lab. He has heard of 8 and her gang's crimes, so naturally, he assumes that Marcy and Ricky are here to kill him as well. This forces Ricky to use his powers on Morris, and the latter eventually ends up calming down. However, before Ricky can disarm him, Marcy pushes him away, grabs Morris's gun, and then holds him at gunpoint. Marcy has had enough. She is frustrated, angry, and desperate, and thus she says, "You're going to tell me where my sister is, and you're going to tell me now." Stranger Things, Into the Fire, issue number 3, An Inch of Freedom. Marcy holds Morris at gunpoint, and this sudden outburst has even shocked Ricky. He tries to get a hold of the situation, tries to calm down Marcy, but this is when she threatens to shoot him as well. At this moment, she is sure Ricky will use his powers on her to de-escalate the situation, but Ricky assures her that he would never do that. Marcy eventually lays down the gun for her sister's sake, and this is when Morris begins talking. He is a broken man, a horrid man, yes, but a broken one as well. He tells Marcy that Jamie was one of their most promising candidates, albeit her only issue was that, just like the others, she couldn't control her powers. This led to a lot of people dying, and when Brenner assigned 8 to pacify and control her, he knew it was the calm before the storm. By then, Morris had been working closely with 9, and though he was hoping for a breakthrough, things turned out rather differently when Brenner decided to focus all their resources on 11. 11 had control. She had the strength to do what he needed, which is why he decided to abandon all other candidates. To Brenner, all the other children were now a liability, and he ordered Morris to take care of 9 himself. Morris was a lot of things: a bad man, a bad doctor, a failed scientist. Many would call him a monster, but he too had his limits. He too had lines he wouldn't cross, and so instead of killing 9, he whisked her away and placed her in an institutional facility that owed him a lot of favours. He personally crafted her medication schedule to ensure that she would stay satiated. However, this confession doesn't sit well with Marcy. Morris essentially had his sister placed on a drug-induced trip indefinitely, but to Morris, this was the best he could do back then, or even now. This is when Ricky intervenes and demands the institution's address and name, and though Morris hands it over, he warns them about 9. 9, according to him, is quite volatile. She has been manipulated beyond what her psyche could handle, and if they are going to rescue her, they will have a lot to deal with. After all, if neither Brenner, Morris nor the program could control her, then what makes Ricky and Marcy think that they can? We then switch to Jamie and catch up with her. The allure to use her powers has grown to exponential heights, and in her masked delusion, we see Jamie finally giving in. She walks through the tower that traps her, but this time, something has changed. On the walls is a mirror, but instead of reflecting Jamie, it shows Marcy. Marcy and Ricky leave Morris's place after grabbing the address, and though the two fight and argue on the drive back, both of them understand where the other is coming from. Ricky never wanted to hurt Marcy, and she never intended to threaten him. She just wants to save her sister, and Ricky wants the same. The two of them quickly reconcile, and this is when we see Jamie deciding that the image she sees reflected in the mirror is the one she hates. It is the one person who set her down this path, the person who caused her all of this misery, and thus Jamie ends up punching the mirror. We then see that in the real world, Jamie has punched her cell wall, which has wounded her hand and has splattered blood everywhere. A nurse begrudgingly walks in to take care of her, but instead of bandaging Jamie's hand, she decides to drug her instead. But Jamie isn't a princess trapped in the tower anymore. She doesn't need to be rescued by a knight in shining armor. She is going to save herself, and so, before the nurse can drug her, Jamie grabs her hand and sets it on fire. The nurse writhes and screams in pain, but Jamie simply sees this as an opportunity to escape her prison. As she imagines herself leaving her tower, Jamie finds a huge wildflower in the woods, which she decides needs to be burned down. The magic she had feared for so long had been her savior, and there was no backing down now. In the real world, however, Jamie is setting a small paper flower ablaze on a notice board, and this is followed by her burning down the entire facility. Before the security can catch her, Jamie escapes into the woods, and this is when we catch up with Marcy and Ricky again. They are driving to the facility where Jamie is being held, but as they are doing so, they soon spot fire trucks heading in the same direction. They both fear what this means, and upon reaching the location, they realize that their suspicions have come true. The entire facility has been set ablaze, and the place is now swarming with firemen, police officers, first responders, and journalists. Stranger Things, Into the Fire, issue number 4 of Monsters and Men. Jamie is now fleeing into the woods, feeling free for the first time, and, though in her visions the masked princess smiles, in the real world, Jamie is scared and all alone. Ricky, meanwhile, has used his powers on the detective in charge to find out what happened at the facility. Everyone inside is safe, albeit with some injuries, but Jamie, the girl who caused the fire, is missing, like many others. He informs Marcy of the same, and she quickly figures out that Jamie has likely run off into the woods, considering what Carly showed them. She forces the two of them to split, and Ricky reluctantly allows her to go off on her own. But once she is gone, he sarcastically comments that he isn't old enough to deal with teenagers. Marcy runs through the woods while screaming out Jamie's name, hoping that she can finally reunite with her sister while still being haunted by their memories. Jamie, on the other hand, has picked up a stick and she has set it ablaze, and to the masked princess in her delusions, this is now her weapon, a channel for her powers to show what they can do, a way for her to save herself. This is when Marcy stumbles upon her, but instead of reconciling with her sister, Jamie swats the burning stick at her and screams, "You're the one! You did this! I won't let you hurt me again, Marcy," who is still on the ground, begs her sister to realise who she is. She is Marcy, her twin, her sister, and her only family in the world. But Jamie can't be reasoned with because to the masked princess, her reflection in the mirror is coaxing her into being trapped once again. The reflection wants her to give in once again, but Jamie isn't going to do that anymore. And so she takes the flaming stick and swats it at Marcy again and again. But before she can deal the final blow, Ricky shows up and shoots the stick right out of her hand using Morris's gun. He then puts out the flames while asking Marcy if she's okay, and this is when Marcy lashes out at him, leaving Ricky extremely puzzled. What did he do wrong? He was simply saving Marcy, the only family he had left in the world, and this is when Marcy makes him realise that Jamie is family too. She is and always has been a part of their family, and their argument seems to bring Jamie momentarily back to reality. Though Ricky is still apprehensive, Marcy persuades him that this is the only way, that only she can bring back Jamie and save her. And so she reaches out to her sister again, and we see that this time the masked princess hesitates because the reflection in the mirror now speaks of her sister. It speaks like her sister, and that this reflection wants to save her. But the masked princess also knows that this is the reflection that abandoned her. It's why she wears a mask and hates her face, and little do these people know that the stick, a sword, was only a tool. The real power lies within her. Jamie then conjures up a fireball, and though Ricky instantly reacts, Marcy forces him to stand down, and this is when Marcy confesses to Jamie that it was wrong of her to abandon her sister. It was wrong of Marcy to never check in on Jamie and find out what eventually became of her. But now that they're here, it doesn't have to be that way anymore, and though Marcy hates herself as much as Jamie hates her for abandoning her, she is still happy to see her sister alive and well once again. She begs Jamie to come back to her, and this is when, instead of using her powers for destruction, the masked princess uses them to melt the glass. Jamie then removes her mask, gives up on being the masked princess, and walks into the mirror to reunite with her reflection, her sister. The two of them hug, and though Ricky hates interrupting this moment, he reminds Marcy of what has happened and why they need to leave as soon as possible. And so, the next day, we see Marcy and Jamie sleeping soundly in a motel, but something seems to be haunting Ricky, and so, while his two sisters are sleeping, he walks away and drives to Morris's home. He then takes out Morris's gun and aims it at him, but this was just a prank, and instead of shooting the doctor, Ricky returns his gun to him. But this isn't the end. Ricky has seen what has become of Jamie, what the program did to her, the same program that Morris was a part of for all these years, and Ricky isn't just about to let this go. Though Morris may have done a bit of good, it doesn't erase his past, it doesn't make up for his crimes, and so Ricky uses his powers, makes Morris realise the monster that he is, and then asks him to do what he already knows needs to be done to atone for his sins. Ricky is beyond angry. Blood from his nose is smeared across his face, but this man wronged his sisters. This man is part of the reason they're so damaged, and he simply can't let this go. After using his powers, Ricky simply leaves Morris's house, and as he makes his way back to his car, we hear a gunshot in the background, and it's clear that Morris has shot himself. This is the thing about trauma. It doesn't get destroyed. It doesn't go away. It simply gets passed on from one person to another. Jamie may have been saved. She may have finally stopped being the masked princess. But Ricky is the one who carries that burden now. Seeing Jamie that way, the twin sister of the girl he saved all those years ago, the girl who Francine promised to keep safe, broke Ricky. Stranger Things. Science Camp. Issue number 1. Surprise camper. We start the issue with Dawn, one of the camp counsellors, darting through the woods with a horrified expression on her face. She even falls down during this process, but when she reaches the lake, we learn that she is trying to save her precious hairdryer. Laurie, one of the other counsellors, is dunking it in the lake because she can't deal with Dawn using it early in the morning. Hours later, it's camp time, and all of the campers finally arrive on site for the summer. Among them is Dustin, high off the events of Season 1, who is hoping to have a fun summer with like-minded people. However, as soon as he gets down from the bus, he quickly realises that, at science camp or Hawkins, some things don't change, no matter the location. He finds 2 kids bullying a third one because he goes to a public school. Dustin knows what it feels like to be bullied, and after all that he has faced last year, he isn't about to back down. He confronts the 2 kids and quickly turns the argument around when they mock his teeth by claiming that cleidocranial dysplasia is a basic mutation and that he is just like the X-Men. The bullies should know about it. After all, they did enroll in science camp. Dustin mocking them catches everyone's attention, and soon the embarrassed bullies decide to leave the kid and Dustin alone. Once they're gone, everyone claps for him, and when the little kid thanks him, Dustin explains to him that tough guy bullies hate looking weak, and by that logic, smart guy bullies hate looking like morons, and that's exactly what Dustin did to drive them away. The little kid's name is Stephen, and after they've introduced themselves to each other, the 2 of them walk away, and we catch up with the counsellors at night. Stephanie is reading up on camp activities and preparing herself for tomorrow, but the rest of them are busy debating and betting on which of the kids is going to throw the first punch this year. And the stakes? Good old warm beer. Stephanie doesn't believe something like a violent fight could break out in camp. After all, this is a science camp, and most kids here are likely nerds. Sadly, the track record of previous years proves her wrong. Every year, someone throws a punch at least. This is when the other girls start bullying Stephanie for reading up on camp activities, and their back and forth reveals that most of the counsellors are working here simply for the money. They don't care about the kids or the camp, and whatever little Stephanie did care about will be gone after tonight. We then see Dustin and the rest of the kids going through various camp activities the next day, including building and launching model rockets. At lunch, Dustin is telling Steven about his time at the arcade and how they have a friend named Max who can beat them all. Every time Dustin mentions Max, there's a slight twinge of sadness because she chose Lucas over him. But they're all friends now, so Dustin keeps reminding himself that it's no big deal. This is when the two bullies from earlier show up once again and begin harassing Dustin for lying. And Dustin simply turns around and says, "Sounds like you two have never talked to a girl before." And this is all he takes to shut them up. Dustin wishes he could tell them about Eleven, even make them meet her to set them straight. But these are things Dustin knows he is going to have to stay quiet about. When the conversation gets heated, Dustin tells them about the high school dance and how his Dungeons and Dragons campaign has 2 girls in it, but neither of them believes him. And this is when Dustin goes out of his way to claim that he is now the dungeon master of his own game. Steven is in awe of Dustin, and he wants Dustin to run a game for them at camp. Dustin hesitates because he neither has dice nor his other stuff, and the bullies use this chance to scoff at him and to call him a liar once again. This is when Dustin lashes out. He storms up from his seat and claims loudly in front of everyone at the camp that he is going to be running his own game in a week or 2. This isn't what he wanted to do, and deep down, Dustin knows that he is out of his depth. At night, Stephanie sneaks into the abandoned cabin at camp to prove to her fellow counselors that she can be fun too. Once inside, Stephanie quickly finds the hidden beer and then pops open a can. However, before she can take a sip, she hears someone entering the shed. Naturally, she falters, apologizes, and offers a beer to the mysterious figure, suspecting that it might be one of the other counsellors who might have followed her here. However, there is no counsellor. This is a masked and hooded figure who is wielding a bloodied screwdriver, and when Stephanie realises this, she quickly drops the beer on the floor. Stranger Things. Science Camp. Issue number 2. Open Door. The news of Stephanie leaving the camp is exciting gossip that is spreading around the camp like wildfire. But instead of news of her demise or her body being found, everyone is being told that she simply left the camp in the middle of the night without telling anyone. All she left was a 3-word note that read, "I quit, goodbye." Stephanie was Dawn's roommate, which means that Dawn now has the cabin all to herself. Eventually, the news reaches Dustin and Steven, and though Steven finds it weird that someone would just leave the camp like that, Dustin reassures him that everything is fine. After all, she left a note behind. Steven finds the scenario to be too eerie and compares it to the Friday the 13th movie, and this gets the two of them talking about Dustin's upcoming Dungeons and Dragons game once again. Dustin quickly realises that he should be preparing for it even if he doesn't want to. After all, his declaration in the lunchroom means his pride is now on the line. He decides to go out into the woods so he can prepare his campaign in peace. However, on the way there, the two bullies begin mocking him once again. Dustin naturally hits them back with words that hurt, but through the banter and his memories of last year, he also comes up with an idea for his Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Of course, he can't tell them about what happened in Hawkins, but he can use those events, turn them around, make them more fantastical, and then form the basis of his new campaign. The two bullies are puzzled when Dustin tells them that his campaign is going to be set in a magic school. But once he leaves, one of them confesses that he too would like to be a part of Dustin's Dungeons and Dragons campaign because it sounds fun, and thus Dustin spends the rest of the day daydreaming and preparing for the upcoming campaign. And at lunch, we are finally introduced to Susie. It's clear that she has had a crush on Dustin for some time now, and today is the day she is going to do something about it. Once she spots Dawn alone on a table, Susie quickly goes and talks to her about how one is supposed to approach boys that you like. Dawn advises her to simply talk about something they have in common, and when Susie can't think of something, Dawn advises her to talk about something sciencey. After all, they're at a science camp, and thus Susie approaches Dustin in the evening while he's preparing his campaign. She starts by talking about science, but Dustin tells her that he is actually preparing his Dungeons and Dragons campaign. He then starts telling her how all of this started, how he never actually wanted to host the campaign in the first place, but how he has to do it now. Dustin is simply sharing, but Susie is nervous, and so she assumes that Dustin is trying to tell her that she is wasting his time because he is so busy. Susie. She apologizes for bothering him and runs away. And though Dustin tries to stop her and tell her he didn't mean it, Susie is already out of earshot. That night, while Dawn is alone in her room, someone keeps knocking on her door again and again. Every time she opens it, there's no one there. Dawn assumes this is Chris's doing because he has had a crush on her ever since the camp started. But when it happens for the third time, Dawn finds someone standing on the other side of the door. It's the mysterious figure from last night, this time wearing an Einstein mask and wielding a screwdriver. Dawn screams when she is attacked, and this scream is heard by Steven and Dustin. Dustin quickly grabs his flashlight and decides to investigate, and a scared Steven begrudgingly accompanies him. The two of them make their way to Dawn's cabin. However, when they enter the open door, they find no one inside. Dawn's belongings are still sprawled across the room, but she is nowhere to be seen. Stranger Things, Science Camp, issue number 3, a real-life adventure. The next morning, Susie decides to visit Dawn to discuss what happened with Dustin, but to her surprise, Dawn's cabin is completely empty. Unlike last night, all of her belongings are gone, and this is when Laurie shows up and tells Susie that Dawn, just like Stephanie, left in the middle of the night. Laurie is quite rude about the entire thing, and Susie doesn't find that great, but she is more focused on the fact that if any more counselors leave, then the camp might have to be shut down early. We then see Dustin and the other kids participating in races where solving math problems is part of the activity, and to Dustin's surprise, Susie is faster than he is. After the race, Dustin decides to work on his campaign once again, and though the bullies try to interrupt and mock him again, Dustin simply shows them the middle finger and continues into the woods. We then see the mysterious figure from last night dressing up again, this time in the middle of the day, to take out another victim at the camp. Dustin, meanwhile, is busy preparing his campaign when he hears someone trying to sneak up on him. Assuming that it's the bullies here to harass him again, Dustin screams, "Are you at least smart enough to figure out where to stick it? Or do I need to draw a diagram?" Unfortunately for Dustin, it isn't the bullies but Susie who was trying to talk to him again. However, this insult leaves her in tears, and she simply runs away. Knowing that he messed up big time, Dustin runs after her, and this is when we catch up with Laurie, who is trying to smoke in the middle of the woods without alerting anyone. However, the match she lights flies out of her hand, and Laurie frantically stomps on it to prevent a fire. This is when she is ambushed by the mysterious killer in the Einstein mask, and as soon as she lays her eyes on him, she begins screaming. Her screams are heard by Chris and the other counselor, and they both console Laurie when she comes running to them in tears. She tells them that someone tried to kill her, and Chris instantly decides to call her boyfriend Joshua so they can discuss how to handle this situation. Dustin, meanwhile, catches up to Susie, apologizes for what he said, and then introduces himself and learns Susie's name in return. However, before they can talk more, they overhear Laurie telling the others about what happened, and so the two of them decide to sneak closer to the cabin in order to hear everything. Joshua is horrified to learn that someone tried to stab his girlfriend with a screwdriver, and he wants to report the incident, but Chris and the rest aren't so sure about it. After all, it sounds like a harmless prank, and if they do indeed report it, the camp will be shut down, and they will be out of jobs. They convince Laurie and Joshua to hunt down the killer on their own before this gets out of hand, but little do they know that Dustin and Susie have heard everything, and that Dustin has his own plans. He loves this camp, and there's no way he's going to let some wannabe murderer spoil his summer. And though Susie is apprehensive at first, Dustin soon convinces her by explaining that the killer is only targeting counselors. He doesn't see the campers as any threat, which makes them perfect for this job, and so they run back to Dustin's cabin, where, surprisingly, Steven is hanging out with the two boys who were bullying him on the first day. Dustin, too, is surprised by them being here, and it turns out they had come to witness the start of Dustin's Dungeons and Dragons campaign. However, once Dustin tells them that they will have to postpone the game, they begin mocking him again. However, this is when Susie stands up for him. She has seen him hard at work preparing for the campaign, and she won't let these boys diminish his work. Dustin is surprised and grateful for this, and all the kids quickly unite when they are told about the murderer and how the camp is at risk of being closed early if they don't catch him. After a moment of silence, one of the kids asks, "So how do we stop the killer?" And Dustin replies, "Time for a real-life adventuring party." Stranger Things, Science Camp, issue number 4, an adventure of a lifetime. Dustin and the rest of the campers, including Susie, Stephen and the bullies, are making their way through the forest while on the hunt for Laurie's attacker. As they talk, we learn that none of the other kids from the other cabin wanted to join them on this hunt, and this brings up the topic of the postponed Dungeons & Dragons game, and this is when Dustin learns that the bullies actually wanted to be a part of his campaign. Their names are Trevor and Dean. Dean's brother is a DM, but they have their game going on while he is at camp. As for Trevor, he's always wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons, but neither of his friends back home is interested in it. They introduce themselves to each other and then discuss how they are supposed to catch the killer. Trevor suggests splitting up, but everyone turns him down. Susie suggests that Dustin should be the one in charge, and when he begins to speak, anyone who goes against Dustin gets the biggest stink eye from her. Step 1, they stay together. Step 2, they find the next target, but before Dustin can get to step 3, Trevor begins to walk away, which forces the entire group to stop talking and start doing. Laurie, meanwhile, is being forced to rest in the boys' cabin while they go out and hunt for the attacker. Joshua insists on reporting the incident, but Paul and Chris aren't too keen on it. They don't want to lose their jobs. Plus, they aren't even sure if this was a real attack or a prank. Joshua reluctantly agrees with the plan, but insists that he will inform the camp owners about the attacker if they aren't able to resolve this issue in the next 2 hours. As the boys head into the woods to track down the attacker, they hear a branch breaking behind them, and this tenses all of them up. When they hear nothing else, they chalk it up to being a wild animal and then continue on their way. Little do they know that they are being trailed by Dustin and the gang, and though Stephen thinks that joining forces with the counselors is a decent idea, Dustin and the rest of them know better. They know the counselors won't let them help, and moreover, it might get them in trouble. This makes Dustin reminisce about Steve and how he never treated him like a kid on their adventures. Soon, the boys are once again ambushed by the Einstein mask attacker out of the blue, and during this confrontation, the killer manages to stab Joshua in the chest. Paul and Chris rush to his aid, but before the attacker can have another go, Dustin and the rest of the kids pounce on him. Stephen gets the screwdriver away from the killer, and Dustin instantly rips off the Einstein mask. To everyone's surprise, it's Laurie underneath it, and she is the one who has been attacking the counselors. She begrudgingly confesses that the screwdriver is fake, and this is when they all realize that her boyfriend Joshua was in on this all along. They both wanted out of this job, but if either of them quit on their own volition, their parents wouldn't let them hear the end of it. And so they decided to stage attacks on the counselors so that the camp would shut down and they would get to go home. This baffles Dustin and the kids. How could Laurie and Joshua go through so much trouble to shut down the camp just because they don't have the balls to talk to their parents about it? How could they just ruin everyone's summer just because they're a coward? Dustin gives a big, inspiring speech about what the camp means to him and all of his friends, and by the end of it, Paul is at Joshua's throat because he was about to lose his job because of his elaborate, cowardly prank. He is going to make sure that the camp owners, as well as Joshua and Laurie's parents, get to hear about this, which will ensure they never get jobs at the camp again. His friends, including Trevor and Dean, compliment Dustin once everything is done, and Dustin doesn't see it yet, but Susie is clearly quite impressed by him. At lunch, Stephen and Dustin discuss the Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and we learn that everyone, including Susie, is excited to be a part of it. This is when Susie pulls Dustin away to talk to him in private, and wouldn't you know it, she is the one who confesses her feelings for him before Dustin can even utter a word. Dustin is speechless for a few seconds, but he then expresses that he, too, likes Susie more than she likes him. In fact, Dustin thinks she is even braver than he is for having taken this step while he was desperately trying to muster up the courage to do the same. In the end, though the two of them are worried about how they will keep this relationship going once the camp is over, for now, they decide to cherish and enjoy the time they have together. As they walk away, they discuss taking part in the talent show and are mulling over the idea of performing Never-Ending Story as a duet together. Stranger Things and Dungeons & Dragons. Issue number 1. The adventure begins. This is the story of how the boys we know and love came to be as we know them today. Lucas, Mike and Will had been friends for a while, and they would regularly get bullied at school and in the neighborhood. One day, while being chased by their bullies, Mike and Lucas hide in an alley and then sneak their way through an open door and, surprisingly, find themselves in the back of a bookshop. Tons of old and new books are piled in towers that reach for the sky, and soon they find themselves being confronted by the owner because they aren't exactly being quiet. Lucas and Mike watch in awe at the man's depiction of the Battle of Waterloo through miniatures, and he tells them all about it like an excited child. After all, the Battle of Waterloo changed the future of Europe, and, in doing so, it changed the world in which we currently live. Mike is tuning out of the conversation. However, this is when Lucas finds the miniature of a dragon in the owner's collection. He then goes on to tell them that the miniature is part of the new game they have been testing in a store called Dungeons and Dragons. And wouldn't you know it, an hour or so later, Mike and Lucas are reciting the same sales pitch about the game's fantastical world and limitless possibilities to Will in order to get him on board. To get the game, all they need to do is bring in old used books that nobody reads, which will earn them store credit. Thus, after a bit of work, Lucas, Mike and Will are on their way to the store with a toy wagon full of books. Boys being boys are dreaming of all the store credit they'll get for their books and discussing the new movie, Aliens, when suddenly their bullies show up to harass them. Lucas decides to stand his ground, which should give Mike and Will enough time to get away with the books. He throws a few books at them and holds them back, which allows the others to drag the wagon up a nearby hill. Lucas soon joins them, though he ends up losing his jacket in the confrontation, but he never really liked that jacket in the first place. They seem to have averted the danger, but this is when Mike loses his grip over the wagon, and all the books, along with the wagon, end up in a muddy ditch. Thankfully, when they get to the store, the owner decides to donate them a basic pack of Dungeons and Dragons anyway, if they promise to keep the muddy books out of his store, and thus begins their venture into the fantastical world of monsters and heroes. They spend the entire day learning the game, and soon the ever-changing game of imagination takes over their lives. They discuss their campaign at school, don't care if the girls find them dorky, and eventually end up meeting Dustin at lunch. Dustin loves math and science, and when he hears Lucas claiming that it's impossible to get a 10 on a 2d6 die roll, Dustin explains to them that it isn't impossible. They have a 16.67% chance of getting a 10. This impresses them, and when Dustin is told that their Dungeons and Dragons campaign has a lot of maths, he decides to join the game. And this is how the four boys became the best of friends, and the legend of Will the Wise, Lucas the Lion, and Dustin of Dwarfhome was created. Over the next few months, they battled monsters, grew their characters, became heroes, and even built their Fort Byers in the woods. And then, on April 7th, 1981, they celebrated Mike's birthday, and with that, the end of their campaign by defeating Cinderstone, the fire giant. Mike's a bit sad after the battle. His friends are level 3, and he has no more left to continue the campaign. But this is when the boys bring out their gift for Mike. It's the next Dungeons and Dragons set they need for their campaign, and Mike realizes that their journey together has only just begun. Stranger Things and Dungeons and Dragons. Issue number 2, Cursed Claws. This issue picks up on the 27th of November 1983, shortly after Will's rescue. The boys are visiting him in the hospital, and after a brief banter about hospital smells, they finally ask Will about his health, and he gives them the news that he will be discharged the next day. They celebrate, and Dustin and Lucas say that they can't wait for things to go back to normal, and Will agrees with them. However, it's only Mike who notices Will's struggle and how badly he needs things to go back to the way they were. He spends the night trying to come up with ideas, trying to come up with a way to make the next part of their campaign more exciting and fun. But how can that happen now that they've faced and overcome their fears in real life? How can they go back to fighting imaginary monsters after fighting the real thing? Mike, disheartened by this conclusion, chucks his miniature Demogorgon in frustration and then stomps out of the basement. At lunch in school the next day, Dustin and Lucas are excited about the arcade that's about to open, but when they notice Mike's mood, they reassure him that Dungeons and Dragons is still their favourite game. Mike smirks and thanks them. That evening, Mike visits Will and realises that his friend needs a win now more than ever. And what's worse is the fact that Will knows that his character in the campaign should already be dead. If Will the Wise had failed his role for the fireball, it was the Demogorgon's turn next, and considering his health, Will would have surely died from his attacks. This is when Mike quickly makes up an excuse. Will the Wise won't die because he still Will has the gemstone that the proud princess gave him. The gemstone, in fact, is a scarab of protection, and because the Demogorgon's claws are cursed, Will would be saved. Will appreciates his friend looking out for him, but a handout like this makes Will feel out of place once again. That night, while trying to design his campaign once again, Mike crashes out and screams, and this is when his older sister Nancy decides to check up on him. Mike reluctantly tells her about his campaign, how he wants Thessal Hydra to be the next big monster they face. The problem is that Lucas is already wielding Winter's Dark Bite, which is very effective against the creature, and he will likely be the first in the initiative order, which means Will wouldn't get to kill the monster. The conversation continues. Nancy does her best to help Mike, but then she finally realizes that Mike is trying to help Will become a hero and not be a victim anymore. She hugs him, and Mike tells him that after what has happened to them, he knows things will never be the same. This is when Nancy tells him that he is right. Things won't ever be the same, but that doesn't mean that they have to be bad. Mike and the rest of the boys are still best friends. Dungeons and Dragons kept them together, and honestly, Nancy wishes she had friends like Mike, and thus, Mike realizes that the game was never about him or his campaign. It was always about telling a story together with all his friends. And so, the next weekend when they all show up to his place, they start the game again as if nothing had changed. Will and Mike explain to Lucas and Dustin how Will the Wise manages to survive the Demogorgon's attack using the Scarab of Protection, and thus their campaign continues. However, in the last panel, we see the shadow of the Mind Flayer lurking above Will, and no one seems to have a clue about it. Stranger Things and Dungeons and Dragons, issue number 3, Shatter. This takes place 7 months after 11 closed the gate at Hawkins' lab. Everyone knows about 11 being cared for by Hopper, which is why everyone, including Max and 11, has shown up to Mike's place for the game today. Will greets them while cosplaying as Will the Wise, which takes everyone by surprise. Mike's mother promises to order them pizza, and the group quickly starts getting Max and 11 up to speed. Mike teaches them the basic rules, and they then start creating their characters. 11 chooses to become a magic-using elf, and when Will tries to say something, Mike pulls him aside because this is a great chance to impress 11. He asks Will to be the dungeon master and a cleric for this game so that Mike can become Mike the Mighty, a paladin who uses the power of light to defeat evil. Lucas and Dustin find these sudden changes distracting, but they're hell-bent on playing the game nonetheless. Max then tries to become an imaginary race called the Zoomers, and this is when Will helps redirect her and tells her that she can become a Quickling. Max names her character Max the Zoomer Doomer, and thus this begins their new campaign. 3 new heroes, 2 reincarnated old ones, as they make their way through a canyon called the Broken Rock. Soon they are attacked by Cave Fisher, who manages to trap Lucas in his web. They roll initiative, and 11 starts by using the magic missile spell on the creature. Max races up the cliff and cuts the web to free Lucas, but when it's Cave Fisher's turn, it decides to attack 11 because she did the most damage. Mike steps in to take the attack instead, and, in retaliation, 11 decides to use the spell Shatter. This is all new to her, and so she ends up concentrating a bit too hard, which creates a small quake that moves their minis, and, unfortunately, causes the wall behind them to crack. A shadowy creature rushes out of it, and all of them jump into action, fearing the worst. They track it to a nearby closet, while Mike does his best to keep his mum out of the loop. The mysterious creature evades the gang once again, and they quickly follow it as it runs out of the house. It is hiding in the bushes outside, and this is when 11 uses her powers to separate the plants, only to discover that it's simply a mama rat and her babies. Instead of getting rid of them, Mike and 11 bring the family of rats some food and a box with blankets to keep them safe sometime later. On the way back, 2 of them hold hands, only to Hopper's dismay, who is already there waiting to take 11 back home. The kids part ways, and we learn that Dustin is leaving for science camp in a few days, and his friends promise to hold off on the campaign until he returns. Stranger Things and Dungeons and Dragons, issue number 4, One Party, One Hero. Will is now moving out of Hawkins, and though the boys decided to visit their favourite bookstore one last time, where their journey started, they are disheartened to learn that it too is closing down. It was a good idea, nonetheless, and though the bullies try to harass them on their way back, we see how much the boys have grown because they simply ignore them. On the way back, Will offers to give up the role of Dungeon Master for tomorrow after all. He won't be be there anymore once he has left town, but the boys turn down his idea instantly. He has been trying to get them to play the game all summer, and they won't let him give up now, so Will promises them an epic last adventure. The next day, after finishing most of the packing, the gang sits down to continue their campaign, and we learn that they are on the last leg of it. Having defeated most of the threats in their world, the ghostly apparition of Will the Wise appears before them from beyond the realm for one last job. The wizard opens up a portal for our heroes, and on the other side is a swarming army of demons. This is their last task, their chance to finally wipe the evil away from this realm, and so, without hesitation, our heroes jump in through the portal and start the fight. They slash and punch, use their summons, cast spells, and demons fall down like flies. However, their numbers are overwhelming, but the gang doesn't give up. We see Max especially invested in the battle as she slams her fist on the map, but Eleven seems to be having second thoughts. After all that happened with the Mind Flayer, after losing her powers watching people die, this overwhelming fight is affecting her. She decides to give up, gets up to leave, but Mike and the rest quickly stop her. Characters die in the game all of the time, and that's part of the fun. This is their world, their story that all of them are weaving together. And when Eleven realizes this, she sits down and is determined to finish this fight together with her friends. Instead of attacking her character, Will uses true sight to look for a weak point, and this is when Will reveals to them that this was all an illusion created by Will the Wise, who has been possessed by the last remaining true evil in the realm after the destruction of the Elder Tree. And so, this begins their real fight, and eventually our heroes prevail and banish the evil out of Will the Wise. However, the old wizard is now old and on the brink of death, and as Mike the Mighty holds him in his arms, Will the Wise tells them how he was possessed, and though they try to whisk him away to healers, Will the Wise tells them that his time has come. Things change, and the heroes are simply going to have to accept that. The gang desperately tells Will the Wise that they do this without him, but this is when Will, in the real world, says that they already have. This is a tear-jerking and emotional end to their campaign with Will as the Dungeon Master, and it couldn't have been more perfect. They all hug each other, and afterwards, we see Mike helping Will with the last of his packing. He soon learns that Will has decided to donate all of his Dungeons and Dragons books, because just like them, someone else might need them. Like them, maybe someone else needs to learn that they can be heroes too. Stranger Things, The Tomb of Yuban, issue number 1, easy peasy. We start with a memory from Will's life. 2 months ago, he was in the car with his mum's new boyfriend Bob, and Bob was telling him about the clown that would haunt him in his nightmares almost daily. Mr. Baldy was his name, and he continued to haunt Bob until one day Bob decided that he had had enough. Then Bob simply screamed for Baldy to go away, and then the clown vanished. Easy peasy, right? Bob had said, and Will had agreed with him, but Will had struggled to believe that this would actually work against the monsters he was facing. We now catch up with Will in the present day. It's January 13th, 1985, and Will is on his way to the park. He runs into Dustin, and the two of them briefly talk about Lucas and Mike being busy with their girlfriends this year, until eventually Dustin invites Will to his place to check out the science camp catalogue. Will politely declines, and though his friends don't notice it, he is clearly struggling a lot. When he gets home, he catches his mother off guard, who was sobbing again. Bob had become a huge part of their lives, and they both miss him dearly. They stare at Bob's picture on the fridge, and this is when Joyce hugs Will. This was supposed to be a tender moment, but Will, however, is haunted by Bob's death again. She tells Will that it's okay to be sad, but the fact is that Will isn't sad, he's mad, because when he stood up to his monster, when he told it to go away, Bob went away instead. The Mind Flayer took Bob, and this is not sitting right with Will. Seeing his student struggle with his friend's death, Mr. Clark decides to cheer Will up by telling him about Bob's past and how he was the one who founded the AV Club. Mr. Clark shows him all of the club's documents, Bob's old photographs. However, this is when Will spots a map among all these papers. Mr. Clark knows Bob used to love puzzles, so it's no surprise that there's a map in here. Will finds a bunch of maps, and there's even an X on it, and when he puts the maps together in the correct order, he finds the words, "Congratulations, you found the first clue written between the edges." This is clearly a mystery that needs to be solved, and Will quickly gathers all the maps bed and leaves the school. At night, Will gathers up with all his friends for a meeting at Mike's house, and though he is super excited about the maps, his friends clearly aren't. Only Dustin is the one who understands Will, but he too agrees with Mike and Lucas when they say that this isn't a DEFCON 1 situation and that they shouldn't be going out into Mirkwood in the middle of a snowstorm. They instead propose to have a sleepover at Mike's place, and though Will agrees with them, he quickly leaves Mike's place under the pretext of asking his mum for permission. He could have called her, but Will has different plans, which is why he is going home. He lies to his mother that he's going for a sleepover at Mike's place, and after gathering everything he needs, he ventures out into the woods all by himself in the middle of a snowstorm to find the treasure that Bob left him. This is important to Will. He can either hate Bob for leaving them or solve this puzzle. Easy peasy, right? Stranger Things, The Tomb of Yuban, issue number 2, waiting to be found. And thus the boys are at Mike's house waiting for Will, and it doesn't take too long for them to figure out that he's gone searching for the treasure without them. They would have done the same if Will had died in the Upside Down and they found a treasure map left by him months later. Mike is being a dick about the entire situation, but he reluctantly tags along with Dustin and Lucas as they go out to search for Will. They find his bike at the edge of the woods and begrudgingly start following his footprints, which are already snowed over. Dustin is the only one who is excited by the mystery and the one who actually wants to find Will to make sure he's safe. But in his excitement, he ends up losing his footing, which sends him sliding down the nearby slope. Thankfully, he crashes into the creek that was shown on Bob's map. However, the downside is that his shoes and legs are now wet. Lucas knows this is bad. This is how you get frostbite. And though he wants to split up the party so one of them can go back with Dustin and the other can find Will, his idea is quickly shot down when they find Will already at the bridge. This is the location of the X on the map, and Will has already begun digging. Mike arrogantly confronts Will and tries to force him to go back with them, but in the process, he ends up knocking Will down. Emboldened and struggling with all his emotions, Will gets up and starts digging again, and this is when his friends notice that Will is crying. Dustin has a heart-to-heart with Will as he tells him that they all understand how he feels, but right now they need to leave. Whatever's hidden here will still be here tomorrow, but if they don't leave now, he might end up losing his toes. Will finally understands the situation and they all start leaving, but this is when Dustin spots an X on a nearby tree, which ignites his curiosity once again. Dustin starts digging under the tree frantically. Will joins him, and after giving each other a look of disdain, Lucas and Mike join them as well. Meanwhile, Mr. Clark is enjoying a romantic evening with Jen Wu in his apartment when the lights go out. The same happens at the buyer's house, and we learn that all the phone lines in Hawkins are dead as well when Joyce tries to contact Mike's mother. Though Joyce is worried, she convinces herself that Will is likely okay and playing Dungeons and Dragons with his friends. After all, he needs this much more than she does. But little does she know that the boys are in the middle of the woods and that the snowstorm is now picking up. Trapped in the blizzard, Will and Dustin finally manage to pull out a small lockbox from the ground. The treasure is real, and Will uses his shovel to break it open. Inside is another letter, written on canvas and sealed with wax. It's from Bob, and the letter promises to reveal the secrets of the Tomb of Yuban. However, a huge gust of wind knocks them down the very next second, and Will ends up losing his grip on the map that was inside the envelope. Jen and Mr. Clark, meanwhile, use an old radio to get the latest update on the situation outside and learn that the snowstorm is growing bigger and is expected to be as bad as the blizzard of 1978. Mr. Clark then pulls out his supercom so that he can stay in touch with Jen over the radio even if the power is out. However, this is when he hears Lucas's voice on the supercom. Lucas sounds like he's panicking, and all he's able to tell Mr. Clark is that they're trapped under the bridge in Mirkwood before he goes out of range. Jen tells him about the only bridge on the creek near the old cattle trail, and because they can't reach the sheriff due to the dead phone, he decides to take matters into his own hands. Mr. Clark packs the necessary supplies and leaves his home while telling the boys over the radio to stay where they are. However, little does he know that the boys are no longer near the bridge over the creek anymore. Stranger Things, The Tomb of Yuban, Issue number 3, The Mines of Moria. Mr. Clark finally reaches the bridge over the creek, only to realize that the boys have already left. Thankfully, he finds the map that Will lost from the envelope, and this is when we catch up with Will and the gang once again. The blizzard is raging now, and they all know that they need to find shelter as soon as possible. Will can see a hut marked on Bob's map, but Mike doesn't believe him. Bob was a dumb kid like them when he made this map, and when Will tried to defend it, Mike screams, "Bob's dead, Will! And he made all this crap 20 years ago, before he even met you. He's not sending you messages." Dejectedly, Will walks away, and sensing the growing tensions, Dustin frantically looks around and finally manages to spot the ridge marked on the map. The boys climb it and eventually find the hut that Will was talking about. It's more of an abandoned cabin to a mine entrance, and Dustin jokes that this is the entrance to the mines of Moria. And this is when Will tells him that he might be accurate, because the map tells them to go down into the old mines to find the treasure. Lucas is wearing 2 pairs of socks, and he decides to let Dustin borrow one to make sure he stays warm. Mike is as grumpy as ever, but when he turns around to ask Will for help, he realizes that Will has already gone down into the mines. Mike follows him, but ends up breaking the rotting wood, which causes him to fall down. Will helps him up, and though Mike once again tries to convince Will to go back, he gives up when Dustin and Lucas enter the mine as well. They slowly creep their way deeper into the mines, but are soon scared by a decomposing skeleton hanging off a wall. They quickly start running away, but another skeleton is now blocking their way. Their screams echo through the empty mine shafts, but the boys eventually find themselves back at the entrance. Surprisingly, Mr. Clark is here as well, thanks to the map he found, but when he tries to climb down using a rope, another piece of the wood breaks, and he ends up free-falling. Thankfully, he stops before hitting the ground and eventually joins the boys as they go back to the location of the skeleton. When they spot it, Mr. Clark quickly steps between them. However, this is when he loses his balance and ends up breaking his ankle. They all rush to his aid, and this is when Will notices that there's something odd about the skeleton. Both skeletons are made of plastic, and they're some sort of Halloween decorations. Realizing how much this mystery means to Will, Mr. Clark decides to push on after having some painkillers, and eventually they find a lockbox with the word Yuban written on it. Mr. Clark smiles, and this is when Mike realizes that Yuban is newbie spelled backwards. The others already knew about it, including Will, though he is more interested in finding what's hidden inside. Stranger Things, The Tomb of Yuban, Issue number 4, Not Alone. Everybody huddles around the newly found box, and Will quickly slams it against a rock to open it. Inside, however, is no treasure, but a long letter from Bob offering whoever solved the mystery a promise of fellowship. If someone indeed was crazy and curious enough to follow all his clues, then Bob knows that he has found a new friend, and that is exactly what he is offering. He has written down his contact information, and this is when Mr. Clark interrupts them because he finds this utterly fascinating. Bob really did plan all of this all those years ago. He then hid the clues in the documents of the AV department, hoping that someone would follow the clues someday. Will, however, finds all of this to be bullshit and slams the box on the ground. Mr. Clark understands his feelings, bends down to check what remains in the box, and then pulls out a pewter coin with Yuban written on it. Maybe this can be Will's treasure, but Will isn't convinced. Bob made this puzzle years ago, before Will was born. How could Bob have meant for Will to have all of this? He apologizes to everyone and then exits the mine all on his own. An hour or so later, the rest of the boys and Mr. Clark are inside the shed, while Will sulks outside it beside the door. This is when Dustin and Lucas discover that Mr. Clark has passed out on the floor, which means that he needs immediate medical attention. Mike, meanwhile, is losing it. What can they do in this situation? Getting here was a nightmare in the first place. How are they supposed to help Mr. Clark now? And this is when Will shows up and reassures his friends that they have to do what they can. And so, the boys use Mr. Clark's tools and sleeping bags to create a makeshift stretcher and then carry out Mr. Clark. The plan is simple. They find the bridge using Bob's map and then take the old cattle trail back into town. As they're discussing this plan, Mr. Clark's supercom buzzes for a moment, but then quickly dies. The boys don't think much of it, and then brave the blizzard to get Mr. Clark and themselves back home. home. On the way back, Mike once again doubts Bob's map, but when they manage to find the tree with the hole in it, he shuts up for good. Eventually, despite a dying flashlight and a momentary scare where the makeshift stretcher was about to tip over, they manage to make their way to the bridge, where they find Jen already waiting for them. She had heard the plan over the supercom, and she quickly helped Mr. Clark get the medical attention that he needed. Before he leaves, Mr. Clark calls Will to the ambulance one last time, hands over the pewter coin and the second unread part of Bob's letter, and simply says that all of this belongs to Will. On the way back home, Will reads the second part and learns that Bob did account for his mystery being solved 100 years after his death. He writes, "If you find this 100 years later and I'm dead, then thanks anyway, because the fact that you chased the clues down, that you braved the terrors of the tomb to claim this letter tells me that I was not alone." By the time Will has finished the letter, he is home, dishevelled and covered in snow. This naturally worries his mother, but Bob's words resonate with Will, and for the first time since his death, Will feels whole again. Joyce simply hugs him when she sees that her son is crying, and this is where we end this mini-series. Stranger Things. Kamchatka, issue number 1, A Frosty Winter. We begin our story with Dr. Orlaw, who is currently being coerced by his supposed friend, Dr. Natenko, into wearing a mask and heading deeper into a mysterious facility without any more information. Orlaw insists on getting more information, but Natenko convinces him by saying that it's better if he just shows Orlaw what he is talking about. As they walk into the facility, we learn that Orlaw is a respected scientist who has worked a lot on fringe theories, and one of his theories gained him a lot of attention last year, his theory of parallel universes. Orlaw seemingly also has a prototype that, in theory, can harness telekinetic powers. When they reach the facility, Natenko's tone changes, and he tells Orlaw that he's now going to use his device and knowledge to help his country. He's going to be a hero. Though hesitant, Orlaw is both terrified and in awe when Natenko shows him the Demogorgon that they keep in captivity. Orlaw's job here is to help them keep the creature alive, because it is going to be their next big weapon against the Americans. A few hours later at night, Orlaw's daughter, Anna, wakes up from her sleep to grab some water when she notices a loud thump from her father's office. When she checks on it, she finds her father frantically trying to destroy most of his research. When he sees Anna, he quickly grabs her and orders her to take her brother and to stay with Mrs. Sidorova downstairs. However, this is when someone begins to bang on their front door, and Orlaw realizes that it's already too late. He quickly hands his prototype to Anna and orders her to hide as he takes care of the problem. Moments later, Natenko walks into the apartment with KGB officers, and this is when Orlaw tells him that he has destroyed the prototype. Natenko sighs and tells Orlaw that he shouldn't have done that, because now things are out of his hands, and that Orlaw will now have to answer to his senior, Anna, and her little brother, who has now woken up due to the commotion, watch in horror as the KGB agents knock their father out and then drag him away. Anna and Leonid hide under the bed as they hear Natenko and the agents discussing how they're going to force Orlaw to make the prototype again. The next day, Anna is clutching the prototype in her arms as the two kids sit in a public park. They discuss saving their father and maybe checking on the device and what it actually does. But this is when Mrs. Sidorova joins the conversation and tells the children loudly that working for the nation is a great honor, and their father is a hero for doing so. However, she soon tells them in hushed tones to stay wary because the state is always watching. She then points to Mr. Frost's apartment window, and, sure enough, the man has been keeping a close eye on the kids. Mrs. Sidorova then advises Anna to keep doing what she has been doing and to take care of Leonid just like she has since their mother's death. Once she has gone, Anna and Leonid discuss rescuing their father again and eventually decide that they will check in on his lab late at night to find clues that can lead them to him. Orlaw, meanwhile, is suffering, locked in a cell. He is now brought out by two guards and taken to the woman in charge of this entire project, Dr. Karine. There's another scientist in the cell behind her, and it looks like he has been here for months. He is begging for mercy, promising to do everything Karine asks of him, but Karine has no use for him. She is simply going to make an example out of him. She then opens a latch to the man's cell, which allows the Demogorgon inside. The creature instantly leaps at the man and kills him, and and as it is feasting on his flesh, Karine tells Orlor that it would be in his best interest to replicate his device quickly so that the same doesn't happen to him. She then leaves Orlor trapped in the chamber so that he can watch what becomes of the former scientist, and we then see that by now Anna and Leonid have managed to break into their father's lab. However, they haven't found a clue to his whereabouts, and before they can search for more, the front door is flung open and in walks Natenko with his KGB soldiers. He quickly notices that things have been recently moved around and quickly figures out that it's likely Orlor's children who have broken into the lab. He calls them out, threatens them with violence, and this is when a young Leonid rushes out of hiding and beelines for Natenko while demanding his dad. One of the soldiers quickly picks up the kid by his neck, and this is when Anna shows herself. Natenko tries to play the good guy. He has the soldier put Leonid down and, in exchange, asks Anna to give up the device. When she doesn't, he threatens them. However, before he can act on it, one of the soldiers has his neck snapped by Mr. Frost. He quickly takes out the remaining soldiers with exceptional precision and knocks Natenko out when he once again tries to change the narrative and plead for mercy. The kids are baffled by this. Why would Mr. Frost save them? They had always been scared of him, but this is when Frost simply tells them that he is going to help the kids find their dad. When they ask why, Frost tells them that he has a history with the men who took their father and that he is ashamed of what his country has become, which is why he is now trying to do a little bit of course correction. He then finds the clue the kids had been searching for, the file Natenko sent over to Orlor, and it has the location Kamchatka scribbled on it. Stranger Things. Kamchatka, issue number 2, Old Wounds. Natenko is nursing his wounds and ransacking Orlor's lab when another KGB agent, Dr. Ivan, shows up to take over. Natenko doesn't want to give up control, but Ivan is a big man and Natenko's words do little to sway his stance. Ivan quickly demands to see the footage from last night, and when he lays his eyes on Frost, he realizes that they are dealing with one of the most dangerous men currently in this country. Orlor, meanwhile, has been paired with another scientist, Dr. Lem. Lem is a huge fan of Orlor and has followed his work closely. This, however, doesn't sit well with Orlor because how could someone who understands his work allow it to be used for such heinous crimes? Lem, however, is simply a fan, and unfortunately for Orlor, like any fan, he has replicated Orlor's prototype to the best of his abilities. This is when Karine shows up and coldly tells Orlor that they will be testing Lem's prototype today. Meanwhile, Frost and the children are at the train station getting ready to leave for Kamchatka. Leonid is pestering Frost with endless questions, while Frost is doing his best to keep the children hidden and out of the public eye. He helps Anna hide the prototype in her coat. However, this is when Ivan and his men show up to take them in. Frost and Ivan's banter reveals that they have a history together, and according to Ivan, Frost has a shoddy track record when it comes to taking care of children. This seems to hit a nerve because the next second, Frost pulls out a dagger and chucks it at Ivan, which the latter narrowly manages to avoid. It, however, catches one of the officers directly in the throat, and the ensuing commotion allows Frost and the children to escape. Meanwhile, Karine shows Orlor that they have been starving the Demogorgon, but that is not what is killing it. The fact that it has been severed from the hive mind is what is causing its deteriorating health. Lem's new prototype will help it connect to the hive mind through the gateway in America. However, when they sedate the creature and test the device, it fails. Lem is panicking. How could this happen? He checked everything multiple times, made sure everything was up to specifications, but then why didn't the device work? Karine, however, is unfazed. She leaves Orlor and Lem in the cell with the sedated creature to figure something out quickly, because neither she nor the soldiers will be here to save them when the sedative eventually wears off. Ivan and the soldiers, meanwhile, are hot on the heels of Frost and the children, and when one of them stands in their way, Anna promptly kicks him in the shin. This is when Frost corrects her and shows her how to properly punch someone, and then proceeds to knock out the officer. They continue running, and their plan for now is to board the train that is about to leave on the other side of the tracks. However, when they reach the platform, Ivan is already there waiting for them. He knows Frost very well, which is why he can predict his moves. Frost decides to fight Ivan, which should allow the children to escape. However, when he is caught in a headlock by Ivan, Anna uses what she's been taught and punches Ivan Ivan directly in the face. Frost uses this opportunity to kick Ivan in the face and board the already leaving train. They manage to make it on board in the nick of time, and when Anna questions Frost about Ivan, he says, "That's Ivan Kolochev. He's the man who ruined my life and took my daughter from me." Stranger Things, Kamchatka, issue number 3, Traitor. Frost is telling Anna about Ivan and how he was one of his subordinates, his apprentice, and though Ivan was good at torturing Americans and getting results, he was bad at following rules. When Frost tried to rein him in, Ivan perceived it as Frost betraying his country. He eventually started manipulating Frost's seniors, and before long, a full-blown investigation was launched to assess Frost's past decisions. Ivan came from nothing. He was on the streets by the age of 13, he had no family, and Frost had hoped he could fix the kid, a grave mistake. He had let sentiment cloud his judgment, but Frost was no fool. He knew what the state did with perceived traitors. You didn't need to be guilty to face the state's wrath. All you needed were allegations, and so Frost left his wife and daughter behind. He took off and never went back to see them to this day, and before he left, he begged his wife for only one thing, that his daughter shouldn't think that her father abandoned her. She can tell her anything. Maybe Frost died on duty. Maybe Frost went missing in a foreign land. Anything works. Anna sympathizes with Frost. She too lost her mother a few years ago, and she understands what loss is. A few minutes later, they get off at a random station and hotwire a car to continue the rest of their journey. Meanwhile, the Demogorgon's condition is getting worse, and Karine decides to try something drastic to force Orlor's hand. She has Lem put in the Demogorgon's cell as she confronts Orlor about the device. She is sure that he sabotaged it, and if he can just confess to his crime and get it working again, he can save Lem's life. And though, for a moment it seems that Orlor might give in, he stands his ground as Lem's screams eventually die down, and he succumbs to his injuries. It's morning now, and Anna and Leonid find themselves parked outside a random house. Frost grabs a bunch of cash from his emergency cache, and then psychs himself up to walk up to the house, leave the cash, and walk away. However, when he notices footprints in the snow, he realizes that Ivan is already here, and this is when the latter steps out and calls Frost predictable. They soon bring out his daughter, who can't handle the revelation that her father is still alive. In a state of panic, she resorts to calling him a traitor, and Ivan eventually forces Frost's hand by threatening to shoot his daughter. Against everything he is feeling, Frost reluctantly grabs the case out of Anna's hand and hands it over to Ivan, who decides to leave Frost alone so that he can suffer for the rest of his life in his own misery and regret. Karine, meanwhile, is reminiscing about how she managed to get the Demogorgon all the way from America all on her own. She was part of the team at Hawkins' lab. She was the only one who survived the aftermath of that disaster. And when she woke up after the unsuccessful attempt to open the portal, she found the Demogorgon in its infant slug-like state on the ground. Karine brought it back to Russia, nursed it to adulthood, and now she needs to link it back to its hive mind so that she can witness its true potential. This is when she is informed that Ivan has managed to procure the prototype, and though the other soldiers want to feed Orlor to the Demogorgon, now that they have the device, Karine knows better the creature has just been fed, and so she will wait until it is starving again to truly torture Orlor for not cooperating with them. Stranger Things, Kamchatka, issue number 4, Stick Together. Desperate and running out of time, Anna is trying to hotwire the car again, just like Frost did, and this is when an unbothered Maria, Frost's daughter, tells them to take the traitor along with them when they leave. This is when Anna lashes out and tells Maria the truth, and when she refuses to believe Anna, she tells Maria to ask Frost herself. When she confronts Frost, he tells Maria about everything that happened in the past, and though both of them begin to cry, Frost is just happy to have his daughter back. Reinvigorated by this reunion, Frost gets back in the car to rescue Orlor because he is going to stop Ivan from destroying another family this time. Karine, meanwhile, has finally gained possession of Orlor's prototype through Ivan, and she quickly straps it to the Demogorgon's head to save its life. The creature is docile and on the verge of death, which is why they don't even need sedatives this time. However, when the device is turned on, it quickly quickly regains its strength and instantly tries to attack Kareen, who is saved by her soldiers in the nick of time. Kareen, however, is still in awe of the creature's full potential, and she is going to test it now by feeding Orlaw to it. Frost and the kids, meanwhile, have infiltrated the facility by taking out patrolling guards before they can raise the alarm. As they enter it, Frost shows the kids the grenade that he is carrying in case of an emergency. Orlaw, meanwhile, is fighting the guards who are dragging him to Kareen, and when he is shown that Ivan managed to procure his prototype, he threatens to kill Ivan if he harms his kids. However, this is when the power to the entire facility is cut off, and Ivan instantly knows that this is Frost's doing. He quickly leaves and confronts Frost as they enter the facility, and Frost decides to stay for this fateful fight while the children go and rescue their father. Anna and Leonid find themselves in a bit of a pickle when they see that their father is on his knees and is being held at gunpoint by Kareen. Anna decides that they should use all that Frost has taught them, and thus Leonid executes the first phase of their plan by distracting Kareen. He rushes out and pretends to be a naive kid, and when the time is right, Anna ambushes Kareen, punches her under the jaw and knocks her out. They quickly drag their father back to where they left Frost so that they can rescue him, but the fight seems to be going in Ivan's favour. Ivan once again manages to grab Frost by the throat, and this is when Frost decides to sacrifice himself. He screams for Anna and the rest of them to escape as he pulls the pin out of his grenade. Ivan knows that both of them are doomed, and once Anna and the rest of the family are at a safe distance, he lets the grenade fall to the ground. It explodes, which causes a chain reaction in the entire facility and destroys everything. A day later, we see Orlaw and his kids on a train heading for Helsinki. Anna still has Frost's bag full of cash, and they plan to use it to start their new lives in Finland. Orlaw thanks his kids again and again for rescuing him, and Anna tells him, "We'd never give up on you, Dad. That's what families do." Stranger Things. Tales from Hawkins, issue number 1, The Only Kind of Kindness. This issue tells the story of Dale and Henry, the fateful day they went out hunting, which ultimately ended with their demise. Each had a six-pack in hand as they met, and though they both assumed it was their turn to bring the beer, neither of them minded having an extra 6 cans at their disposal. They drank and walked through the woods, casually talking and looking around, clearly not actively hunting any animal. This was more of a ritual for the two of them. Go out in the woods, have a few drinks, walk around, enjoy the day, that sort of thing. But all that changed when Henry found some blood on the ground, and when they walked a bit further, they found a mangled corpse of a vulture. Henry found this to be bizarre, but Dale simply reassured him that it was likely a bobcat or a bear. Either way, that thing is awfully close to town, and both of them know that a lot of children like to play in the woods, including Dale's grandkids. Thus, their yearly ritual had suddenly turned into an actual hunt, the only difference being that the two of them had mistakenly assumed that they were the predators here, and so they left their beer behind and walked deeper into the woods. Henry and Dale heard weird noises, gurgling sounds from afar, which they didn't know was a sign of impending doom. Both of them felt like they were being watched, and thus, when Dale spotted an area where he could have the high ground, he forced the two of them to split up. Henry didn't like being the bait, but he hated the fact that the two of them had split up. In his panicked state, Henry tripped and fell to the ground, and this is when he heard Dale screaming far away. When Henry rushed to his friend's aid, all he found was blood and some slashes on a tree. Seething with anger, Henry began to scream and flail around to get the creature's attention, but he soon realised that he was the prey in this hunt when the Demogorgon showed up to kill him. Henry panicked and froze, and so the very next second, he found himself in the Upside Down. Henry didn't know about this other dimension, but as he stumbled and finally found his footing in this new land, he also found something he didn't want to find: Dale's body. Henry apologised to his friend, tried to hug him in his final moments, but this is when the Demogorgon showed up to feast on his latest kill, and Henry had no choice but to leave his gun behind and flee the scene. He ran through the empty and barren imitation of Hawkins, and after banging on numerous doors, he finally realised that he was all alone here. And though Henry soon managed to find a portal leading back to our dimension in the forest, when he tried to pass through it, the Demogorgon ambushed him, slashed him across the face, and then dragged him away. He came back to consciousness an hour or so later and had a vision of Dale, where his friend mournfully told him that he didn't think they were going back home anytime soon. Henry realised his guts were spilling out of his body, and in his last moments, he croaked for help. This is when Will found him, and to his surprise, the young kid offered him a comforting lie. Will told him that everything would be okay okay and that they would all get home soon. Henry passed away moments later, comforted by the fact that he wasn't alone, the only kind of kindness Will could afford to him in the Upside Down. Stranger Things, Tales from Hawkins, issue number 2, When the Answers Find You. This issue tells the tale of Murray Bauman, an investigative journalist who had been hired by Barbara's parents. Even before his first meeting with her parents, Murray was already working on the case. He had become a part of the community and had started attending karate classes to integrate himself in Hawkins. He had done enough research that he proved himself to be everything Barbara's parents had been looking for after they had been let down by the sheriff department. Murray understood their grief and their need to find their daughter, whom they assumed was still alive, and so he began his sales pitch, making them believe that he could understand Barbara just like her parents, and if there was anyone who could find her, it was him. He then wrote up his bill, included his travel expenses, and an exclusive rate for solely focusing on this case, and though the number was high, Mr. Holland didn't shy away from it because it meant finding his daughter. And so Murray got to work, opened a tip line and allowed all of Hawkins to call him with any information they may have about Barbara. Some told him about the weird lights that night. Some suspected she was taking drugs. Some told him that she ran away because Nancy slept with Barbara's crush. And some kids told her about the monsters in the woods. Some people even pranked Murray, but he kept picking up until he finally found a lead when someone told him of the bald Russian girl who had been hiding around the town. Murray met up with the man late at night, and he was told how the mysterious girl was allegedly hiding in Ted Wheeler's basement, who works in the same company as him. Ted missed work for a few days after that rumour, and many spotted black cars and suits outside their home the following days. When Ted returned to work, he denied every rumour and pretended that he didn't even know who his son's friends were. Murray continued investigating and soon learned more about the bald Russian girl and even got a sketch in his hands. His next big lead came in the form of a convenience store worker who witnessed Eleven using her powers to escape Robert, the store manager, after grabbing a couple of boxes of frozen waffles. However, Murray had his own biases about the Russians, and thus, naturally, he suspected that Eleven was a Russian agent with psionic powers, planted by the Soviets on American soil to either find more like her or to destroy those that are like her. Barbara might have had powers like hers, which is why they likely took her out. Murray tried to explain all of this to Hopper, who naturally found these to be nothing but baseless ramblings of a conspiracy theorist. Murray angrily spent the next few days frustrated and day drinking in his home alone. But then another person showed up right at his doorstep, Nancy Wheeler and Jonathan Byers, and this is how Murray's journey collided with those of our heroes. Stranger Things, Tales from Hawkins, issue number 3, Unlikely Friends. Tammy Thompson is running through the woods frantically while acting for a short film project, and Robin is completely in awe of her Tammy trips and falls. But Robin is too mesmerized to yell, "Cut," when that happens. We learn that she is directing this horror flick, and though the rest of the crew might not share her enthusiasm, she doesn't blame them because she took up this project for completely different reasons. Robin had been a lot of things over the years: a band geek, a rebel, a film buff, and now she was a reluctant director. She would spend her classes staring at Tammy, and Tammy instead spent most of her time staring at Steve, who was a complete arsehole. In Robin's book, she couldn't stand him, but he was a problem for some other day, because that evening, when Tammy questioned Robin about the film, Robin panicked because she hadn't finalised the script yet. Even though they had been shooting for days, Robin didn't know what the movie was about. All she knew was that she wanted to comment on theological fear compared to real fear. Tammy kept questioning Robin, and this naturally forced Robin to spend her nights finalising the movie's script. We are then shown another interaction between Robin, Tammy and Steve at school. Steve intentionally trips someone, but instead of checking in on the guy who fell down, Tammy rushes in to check on Steve's leg. He naturally found this to be weird, and Robin couldn't understand why Tammy couldn't see that she loved her. However, this is when Robin imagined what would actually happen if Tammy did see her love. Tammy was a devout Christian, and she would likely end up calling Robin pathetic and would then pray for her soul at church. This also gave Robin the idea for her final scene of the short film, a scene in which Tammy improvises. That evening, when Tammy questions her about it, Robin simply tells her the end is about wanting to escape, about knowing that living in a small town you'll always be wearing a mask. It's about the fear that no one will ever see the actual you, that you'll always be trapped here. It's like Hermann Hesse said, if the chick is not able to break the shell of his egg, he will die without being born. Tammy finds this inspiring and more than enough material to improvise her scene. She assumes Hermann Hesse is Robin's boyfriend, and before Robin can correct her, she moves on to get her makeup done. Robin's rosy image of Tammy finally begins to crack, and when Tammy quotes Hermann Hesse verbatim in her scene, Robin figures that it was maybe for the best that she never told Tammy about her feelings. A year later, Robin is working in the ice cream shop, still trying to hit on girls she likes, and this is when Steve joins the booth and becomes her unexpected ally. Stranger Things, Tales from Hawkins, issue number 4, Happy Endings. This is the story of Merrill Wright and Eugene McCorkle, two pumpkin patch farmers in the town of Hawkins. They were practically celebrities during the fall season, and many wouldn't guess it now, but the two farmers did indeed start out as dear friends. They had family dinners together, and their kids eventually started dating each other. But then came the animosity between the two families. Their pumpkin patches were next to each other, and so what started out as harmless pranks soon became sinister. The families grew apart, and neither of them apologized, knowing too well that neither of them was as involved as the other. Things once borrowed were returned. Ideas were stolen, but only their kids seemed to be unaffected by this animosity. They still loved each other. Eventually, Wright and McCorkle were always at each other's throats, even in public, and it was always their wives who had to rein them in. However, with each fight, the disdain in their eyes grew and the hatred in their hearts simmered. Then one morning, this Cold War turned into a raging battle when Wright woke up to find all of his pumpkins destroyed. He naturally blamed McCorkle, and when Hopt didn't help him in a substantive way, Wright took matters into his own hands and began spreading rumours that McCorkle was poisoning farms. However, the next day, McCorkle woke up to find his pumpkins destroyed as well, and when he received no help from Hopper, McCorkle took matters into his own hands. He drove up to Wright's farm to collect a sample of the poison. However, this is when Wright confronted him with a rake in his hand. Though logically, it didn't make sense for either of them to poison their own farms to continue propagating this lie. Neither of them had the patience to understand the other, because the anger festering between them had spanned years and decades. A fistfight broke out, which eventually caused Wright to fall into the tunnels underneath his farm. When McCorkle tried to check on him, he too fell in, and this is when the two of them found out what had actually destroyed their farms. It was these tunnels and the toxic air in them. They eventually ended up working with each other, and Wright tried to help McCorkle exit the tunnels by hoisting the man up on his shoulders. However, the ground above was too brittle, and Wright ended up dropping him when he heard a low grumble coming from the end of the tunnel. Figuring out that this might be home to some kind of rabid animal, the two quickly started running in the other direction. Wright ended up tripping over a root, and in this moment of helplessness, in this moment where each man was fighting for survival, McCorkle didn't give up on his former friend. He helped Wright up. They continued running and eventually made their way out of the tunnels when they reached the woods, because the ground was much better here. In the next few days, they were contacted by the government and were substantially compensated for all the damages. Both families then spent the next week or so on a vacation together, and when they returned, things were back to the way they were. They didn't know of the horrors of Hawkins, nor did they care, because upon their return, their children announced that they were getting married. Both families were ecstatic and over the moon, and for once, someone had managed to find their happily ever after in the volatile town of Hawkins. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X Stranger Things, issue number 1, The Tourists. We start the issue in New York City, 1985. A huge, shadowy creature rushes through the subway, and most of the people assume it to be a huge rat. Little do they know that a mysterious doorway has just appeared under their seats. We then see that the gang is visiting New York City on a field trip led by Mr. Clark. He is emphasizing to them to use the buddy system again and again, but our gang is simply distracted by the huge city. Dustin especially wants to photograph everything, including the sewers, because frankly, it's an engineering marvel, but Max doesn't find it fascinating at all. They then spot the Empire State Building, and while Dustin and Lucas discuss getting a pizza slice right in the morning, we see that Mike is impatiently waiting for Eleven to get here, who does so minutes later, and we learn that she took a bus to the city all on her own. However, now that the entire gang is together, they realise that the rest of the class has already left, and that they have missed their train. They plan to board the next one and apologize to Mr. Clark. However, this is when they hear a noise coming from the subway tunnels, and every one of them is sure that it sounds like the Demodogs. 11 causes a ticket machine to malfunction, which allows the gang to enter the tunnel, and after walking for a bit, they come face to face with the source of the growls, Demodog and Mauser hybrids. 11 quickly stands between the dogs and her friends. However, this is when the turtles show up to save the day. Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, and Raphael quickly dispatch the hybrid Demodogs, and before you know it, the gang is face to face with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The turtles' personality quickly shines through, and though the gang knows that their brains should be melting out of their ears, they have no time to think when a pack of non-hybrid Demodogs attacks them while the turtles are distracted. This is when 11 uses her powers to quickly dispatch the pack, and an hour or so later, we see the gang chilling in the turtles' lair while discussing all they know about the recent attacks. Our gang tells them about the Upside Down, Demodogs, and Demogorgons, and the turtles tell them about Baxter Stockman's Mausers. The appearance of Master Splinter and his being the turtles' father baffles the gang even more. But who are they kidding? They've seen a lot of weird things in the past few years, and weird allies are a welcome change. The gang, however, begins to blame themselves for dragging the Upside Down and the Demogorgons to New York City, but this is when Will interjects and reassures them that this isn't their fault. The Upside Down is simply there. It's always there, and there's no escaping what's always there. With Master Splinter's guidance, they quickly come to the conclusion that they need to find Baxter Stockman because it has his name written all over this, but Stockman is supposed to be in prison, and this is when 11 decides to use her powers and the Void to find the mad scientist. And so, Donatello creates some white noise while Raph hands 11 one of their masks. However, before she takes it, he makes sure that 11 knows that she hasn't earned this, and that it isn't being handed over to her on a silver platter like her powers, and that he will be taking the mask back once this is said and done. 11 nods, takes the mask, and then goes into a trance. Once in the Void, she quickly manages to locate Baxter, who is busy frantically scribbling on pieces of paper, one after the other. Seconds later, 11 leaves the trance, and when she is questioned by everyone, she turns to Master Splinter specifically and tells him about Stockman. The scientist isn't in prison. In fact, he knows 11, and he was scribbling an address on pieces of paper over and over again because he wants 11 to find him. And so they come up with a plan, and all of them will be split into two teams. 11, Dustin, Max, Raphael, and Donatello in the first team, and Mike, Will, Lucas, Michelangelo, and Leonardo in the second one. The first team will investigate Stockman, while the second team will try to find the source of the Demodogs in the subway. As they head out, Master Splinter gives them one last piece of advice. Whether they like it or not, they are all in this together now, and if they can't find it in themselves to trust one another, then they would do well by trusting in their mission. Team 1 heads to Stockman's address, while Team 2 heads into the subway tunnels. When Team 1 gets to the roof of the building outlined by Baxter, they realise that he is already there waiting for them, along with at least a few dozen guards. He welcomes 11 and claims that he knows her papa, but the gang has already jumped into action and is fighting the guards by the time he finishes his sentence. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles X Stranger Things, issue number 2, Captive. This issue opens up by showing us 11 back in the cabin with Hopper, who is feeling extremely kind today. He tells 11 that today is the day of her freedom. She can do whatever she wants, which is why he let her sleep in, and he even offers to be her chauffeur. All 11 has to do is open the front door to the cabin and decide what she wants to do with her freedom. We then catch up with the rest of the gang and learn that all of them have been trapped in individual cells and that they can't open the locks. That is, until Raphael uses brute force to break open the door to his cell. He then frees Don, Dustin and Max, and while the four of them figure out what to do next, we see Team 2 deep in the subway tunnels, approaching a seemingly abandoned car that has similar symptoms of infection of the Upside Down that they saw back in Hawkins. When they peek inside, they hit the jackpot because they have finally found the gate to the Upside Down in New York City. The turtles poke and prod at this weird weird organic gateway, while the boys try to get in touch with Team 1 to no avail. This is when Leonardo gets awfully close to the gateway, and the next thing you know, 2 Demogorgons have passed through it to face them down. The 2 turtles get ready to battle while Raphael is busy knocking guards out in what is seemingly Baxter's secret facility. They watch and observe the facility and its security from the back while discussing how they are going to find 11. This is when the huge doors in front of them slide open, and inside are 11 and Baxter strapped to a machine that seemingly connects the 2 of them. In some way, Donatello tells everyone that things just became a lot more complicated because they can't simply walk in and rescue 11 anymore. With her connected to that machine, we then see that the vision we saw on the first page is a simulated reality, somehow controlled by Baxter. He is pretending to be Hopper and is currently taunting and pushing 11 in the vision to simply open the front door to their cabin to earn her freedom. This is when 11 decides that she is going to use her powers to open the door in the vision, which her body mimics in the real world. A door to the Upside Down begins to appear on the wall in front of her, while Dustin and the rest watch on in horror. Back in the subway cab, meanwhile, Mikey and Leo put up a valiant fight against the Demogorgons by using all they had been taught. However, the Demogorgons are formidable foes, and though Mikey and Leo are working in tandem, the creatures are still standing. Raphael, meanwhile, leaves Donatello, Max and Dustin to discuss what they're going to do next while he goes and fetches their weapons. Minutes later, they reveal themselves by snapping one of Baxter's Mausers in half, and when the guards try to apprehend them, Raphael ambushes them from behind and quickly knocks them out. Don and Raph then quickly clear the scene and hold the lead doctor hostage, who tells them that Baxter is currently in a shared reality with 11. There's no way to shut down this experiment because Baxter specifically allocated those powers to himself, and if they decide to yank either of them out without shutting down the program, then it could mess with their minds. This is when Dustin comes up with the idea that one of them should enter the shared reality, and the next thing you know, Raphael is barging into 11 and Hopper's cabin in the illusion. He reveals to 11 that this is all a lie, and surprisingly, Baxter doesn't even refute his claims. He instead reveals himself and begins gloating, and this is when Raph attacks him, but Baxter is unfazed. After all, he is the one in control of this illusion. Mikey and Leo, meanwhile, are being overwhelmed by the Demogorgons in the subway cab, and when they end up losing their weapons, the boys decide to pick them up and join the fight. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, It's Stranger Things. Issue number 3, In the Mind's Eye. Dustin is super excited by the tech that he is dealing with. There's a mad scientist, black market tech, shared realities. What's not there to love? This is when Max reminds him that 11's life is at stake, and that if they don't succeed, then a door to the Upside Down will open up right behind them. Raph, meanwhile, is busy threatening Baxter in the illusion, and this is when the mad scientist screams that Raph and 11 are nothing but tools, experiments. Their entire pathetic existence has always been outside their control. He then changes the illusion and shows them both their past. 11 sees Raph and the rest of them being mutated due to the mutagen, which Baxter calls a failed experiment. Meanwhile, Raph watches a young 11 struggle at the facility as an abandoned child who could be molded and manipulated for Brenner's gain. Baxter's words are clearly getting to 11, and so Raph turns around and reminds her that their being here still amounts to something. They may have been molded, their early years may have been rough, but every decision they've made since then has been their own. They are not a failed experiment or a test subject anymore. They're themselves, and 11 should believe in herself. Baxter begins to gloat again and tries to threaten them, but Raph simply smirks and spins his size as 11 uses her powers on Baxter. Meanwhile, in the subway cab, Will remembers how the Demogorgons hate fire, so he quickly scrambles around, finds a lighter, and sets Leo and Mikey's weapons ablaze. As expected, the Demogorgons take a lot of damage from the burning weapons, and eventually, the battle is over within the next few minutes. This is when Lucas discovers that it seems there are a lot of people trapped in the Upside Down, which causes Mike to frantically fiddle with his supercom again. He wants to contact 11. He wants to call her here so that they can fix everything, but this is when Leo argues with him that they can't wait for 11 forever. This argument escalates but is ultimately killed when Will volunteers to go in and save the people. After all, he's been there. He has seen what the Upside Down is like, and no one should be abandoned there. Mikey and Leo realize what this means for Will, and they commend him on his initiative. Baxter, meanwhile, wakes up strapped to his machine and realizes that he has no choice but to talk unless he wants Raph to go to town on him. He begrudgingly tells them how he found the Demodogs in the tunnel and how he captured them and observed them to finally create his hybrids. His hybrids can communicate with the Demodogs. They can even lead them to different places, and Baxter's tech allows him to control his dogs easily. Everything was going well until 11 showed up and took out his hybrids along with the turtles. This is when we are shown a high-tech device with a monitor that allows Baxter to control his dogs. It's how he was able to see 11 in the tunnel and learn that she was here in New York. He was a close associate of Brenner, and through him, he had heard a lot about her, which is the reason he lured her here to see if Brenner's ostentatious claims about her held any merit. He wanted to use her powers to explore the Upside Down on his own, to have his own gateway, because though his hybrid dogs can do so much, they don't seem to be able to cross the Upside Down gateway. We then switch to Team 2 and watch as they enter the Upside Down to rescue any survivors that they can find. However, this is when the subway car in the Upside Down starts moving, and they have no choice but to reflect on what they've discovered so far. Ultimately, the boys, being cynics, come to the conclusion that they're unlucky, but this is when Leo reminds them that they have the best treasure in the world right now: company, their friends, and brothers in arms. Just like him, they aren't alone, and that is worth a lot at times like these. When the cab stops, they get out at the station only to discover a huge pile of dead bodies. The boys are naturally disheartened by this discovery, but something catches Leo's eye: a type of viscous purple liquid, something he is all too familiar with. Back at the lab, Raph is growing impatient because they don't know what to do next, while 11 stands up for herself and slaps Baxter across the face when he calls her a tool for Brenner's experiments again. Leonardo, meanwhile, confirms his suspicions. He turns over one of the dead bodies, and we learn that these are simply abandoned vessels for Utroms, the alien race that supposedly should be long gone. One of them is still here and seems to have been infected by the vines of the Upside Down. Noticing this, Will quickly uses the lighter to burn away the vines, and though Leo lashes out at him, Will quickly shows him that they actually managed to save the creature. The problem they have right now is the vines and what they are attached to, because if the vines are here, it means so is the Mind Flayer, which complicates things a lot. We are then shown the Mind Flayer, who is currently busy sinking its claws into the Empire State Building in the Upside Down. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles X Stranger Things Issue number 4 Bright Lights. Dustin is screaming over the radio, trying to get a hold of Mike to no avail. This is when Max grabs the supercom out of his hand to change the channel, only to overhear the authorities claiming that lights all over New York City are flickering and heading towards Times Square. Stockman once again tries to manipulate them, but Max quickly figures out that they can use his machines against him. She grabs his controller for the Demodogs, and they decide that they will use the hybrids to control the Demodogs the best they can. As for transport, well, this is when April and Casey show up to offer them a ride to Times Square. Meanwhile, the Utrom has recovered, and when questioned, he reveals that he and his partner managed to open a portal to the Upside Down in TCRI. They were researching other ways to travel the universe when this happened, and this is when the Mind Flayer took control of him and his partner. He is responsible for opening the small gate in the subway, while he suspects that the Mind Flayer is using his partner for more nefarious purposes. April, Casey, and the rest of the gang arrive in Times Square to find it teeming with people, and as reported, all the billboards and lights in Times Square are flickering. April decides to control the crowd, Casey hands Dustin a bat so that he can fight, and Max and Donatello decide to round up all the Demodogs that they can. Raph, meanwhile, hands 11 one of the turtle masks, because in his book, she has proven herself, and it's now time for the real fight. Team 2, meanwhile, Upside Down, arrives at the Empire State Building and discovers the Mind Flayer and the Utrom's partner atop it. The Utrom reveals that they were building a portal big enough to transport a spaceship, and this is when the gang realizes why the Demodogs were let loose in the subway. It was so that the Mind Flayer could round up as many people as possible in Times Square when the portal was opened. Will then bends down and promises the Utrom that they don't blame him or his species apologies for this. They were just trying to get home, and that is something every one of them understands. Weapons are exchanged on both sides, and once everyone is sufficiently armed, the assault begins. A huge battle rages on in both dimensions as both teams slowly inch their way towards the top of the Empire State Building. Once on top, 11 uses her powers, and the others use their might to fight off everyone that stands in their way. And once 11 and the others spot Mike and the rest in the Upside Down, they quickly help them back to our dimension. 11 helps free the Utrom's partner, and Max helps guide the Demodogs back to the Upside Down using Stockman's hybrids. Once that is done, Raph and Dustin smash the portal key together, which finally saves New York. The portal is closed, the gateway and the subway is closed, and when the Utroms are hesitant about their future, everyone reassures them that they will always have a home in New York. The Turtles then drop off the gang near the next attraction their class was supposed to see, and after a hearty goodbye, the two groups part ways. Mr. Clark doesn't believe their story of getting lost on the subway for 1 second, but on the other hand, he is glad that his students are okay. As they walk away, Max apologizes to Dustin because, like he had predicted, the coolest thing about New York was in the sewers. Stranger Things, The Voyage, Issue Number 1, Locked Doors. We start the issue aboard Persephone, a freighter ship captained by a man named Jacoby. Jacoby has seen life and all it has to offer. The weariness of his life is evident on his face. The ship is in the Bering Sea, 1,400 miles out of the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, and right now, Jacoby's first mate is trying to convince him to reverse his latest decision. You see Jacoby and the rest of the crew struggle to make ends meet, which is why they often take up odd jobs like ferrying people between continents without asking questions. The captain has yet again accepted one such job. However, this time, the people he is ferrying are Russians. And because it's the 80s, there's naturally tension between the American crew and their new Russian companions. Before Jacoby can explain to Hicks that the money from these folks will make their job a lot easier, a commotion in the background distracts both of them. One of their crewmates, Hudson, is busy picking a fight with a Russian. It's clear that he is instigating a confrontation, and though Captain Jacoby intervenes, the confrontation ends up becoming about him. The Russian refuses to obey his command to stand down, but before things can get more heated, we are introduced to the commanding officer of the Russians, Dr. Karine. She quickly handles the situation and slyly tells the captain that they can discuss what happened here and more over a drink in his quarters. As they drink, Dr. Karine and Jacoby talk about life and how she admires that Jacoby asks very few questions. Jacoby tells her how he sees the world. There are people who work to make sure there's a roof over their heads, and there are people with power who play their own games in a world on top of theirs. Karine likes his analogy, and Jacoby already knows that Karine is curious. She thinks that there's more to the world and is a person who likes to play with power. This is when she reassures Jacoby that she isn't curious. She knows there is more to this world, and while she is saying this, we see her reminiscing about all she saw in Hawkins. Meanwhile, one of the crewmates, Harker, is in the lower decks on patrol when he comes across a locked door that is blocked by huge boxes. He knows this is the Russians doing, and when he hears noise coming from the other side of the door, he decides to check it out. At first, Harker thinks that Hudson is pranking him. However, this is soon followed by panicked screams and the sound of flesh tearing. On the deck above, the others are busy playing cards and discussing the Russians when they notice that Harker is missing and has spent an awful lot of time on his patrol. Hicks tries to rein in the men's anti-Russian opinions so that they can complete this journey without an incident, but this is when the importance of Harker's absence for so long comes to light, and the crew decides to jump into action. Things are about to heat up between Karine and Jacoby. However, the shouts from the deck of the ship quickly force them to rush outside. Hicks is holding the Russian from before at gunpoint because he is threatening to throw Hudson overboard. Captain Jacoby decides enough is enough and holds the Russian by the throat. And this is when the Russian's partner jumps into action and fires a warning shot at Jacoby. Karine quickly disarms him, reprimands him, and then hands his gun over to Jacoby. She assures Jacoby that she didn't know about the gun and that the captain can keep it. She then decides to have a word with her crew, and this is when Jacoby is informed that Harker is missing, and questions about his whereabouts are what started this entire thing in the first place. The crew decides to look for Jacoby over the next few hours, and it is Hicks who manages to find the open door and a trail of blood in the lower decks. When she heads deeper, She is horrified to discover the gutted remains of Harker, and this is when the culprit walks out of the shadows to confront her. It's a Demogorgon, and Hicks quickly runs out and locks the door behind her before the creature can escape and wreak havoc on the entire ship. Stranger Things, The Voyage, issue number 2, Trigger Happy. The situation has gotten quite worse for Captain Jacoby and his crew. The Persephone is now trapped in a storm, and this is when Bram rushes out to inform him that they've lost both their navigation and communication systems. Bram wants him to turn back, but Jacoby is adamant. They will stay their course regardless of the situation. This is when Hudson and Davis arrive from the lower decks to tell him that they couldn't find Harker in the entire hold, and though Jacoby is mad and holds Hudson by the throat when he tries a crass joke, Jacoby is soon distracted by the fact that Hicks isn't here. This doesn't look good. 2 of his crewmates are now missing, and though Jacoby orders Bram to stay the course, he takes Davis and Hudson with him to his quarters. There, they arm themselves with rifles and pistols, and this is when it is revealed that Jacoby is a former Marine. Hudson vehemently hates the Russians. They're already the ones to blame in his book, and Jacoby is forced to rein him in before they go and confront their new passengers. When confronted, Karine vehemently states that she and her crew had nothing to do with Harker or Hicks's disappearance. However, this is when Hudson notices the 2 Russians laughing at him and instantly raises his rifle. Jacoby is forced to rein him in once again, and he then decides to give the Russians the benefit of the doubt. He orders them to stay in this room and instead takes Karine hostage. If anything untoward happens to his crew from here on out, she will be the one facing consequences. Karine exchanges a mysterious look with her men before leaving, and on their way out of the room, she correctly guesses that Jacoby used to be in the army first. He called his crew his squad mates, and secondly, he ordered Hudson to stand down when he raised his rifle. Karine continues to poke and prod him until Jacoby loses his cool and grabs her by the throat, but she knows better. She knows something bad happened. After all, she is in the Russian army too. To the higher-ups, men and women like them are simply pawns that are to be moved around on the chessboard. Jacoby reluctantly opens up and tells her how he lost his entire squad. Jacoby and his crew were gun runners, illegally supplying guns to a foreign nation on behalf of the American government. Everything was going according to plan until it wasn't. They were ambushed by guerrilla fighters from the trees, and within seconds, his entire crew was dead. Jacoby somehow survived the assault, and upon waking, he was told that they strayed their course into enemy territory, which led to the attack. A few months later, the story was changed, and he was told that it was an unfortunate mistake and the entire event was swept under the rug. When he asked more questions, Jacoby was dishonorably discharged by the army, but before he could say more, the entire ship was rocked by a huge wave. When he heads to the control deck, Bram tells him that the navigation system is back online, but that it is malfunctioning. The Demogorgon's presence on the ship is messing with the electronics, but Jacoby simply chalks it up to the storm. This is when Davis rushes out to inform him that the Russians have left their room against his orders, and that they are headed for the boiler room, and that Hudson is on their tail. Jacoby blames Karine and her men for everything that is happening while they run into the boiler room. However, a gunshot precedes their arrival, and the captain knows that he's too late. Hudson has shot one of the Russians and is currently in denial of what he has done. The man never rushed him, nor was he in his vicinity when Hudson shot him, and naturally, the other Russian, whom Hudson has been feuding with since the start of this journey, lashes out at him. He gets to hit Hudson a few times before Jacoby intervenes to stop the fight. The entire thing is about to fall apart. However, this is when Jacoby hears a low grumbling from behind the boiler and quickly points his gun in the same direction. Hicks finally reveals herself. She is dazed and is having a mental breakdown, and all she is saying is the phrase, "There's a monster on the ship." Once Hicks has received the necessary care, Jacoby hands her a pistol and then tells his crew that he is done playing the nice guy. The Russians brought a monster aboard and they are going to hunt it down whether they like it or not. Jacoby then locks Karine and her men in one of the rooms, and the latter begs him to simply lock the lower floors and let this blow over. All he has to do is ask no more questions and let Karine handle the rest. She can control the monster and ensure that nothing else happens on the entire journey, but the captain knows better. Karine wants to protect the creature, but he won't let that happen. Instead, he is going to kill the creature for what it has done, and Karine won't be able to do a single thing about it. Stranger Things. The Voyage, issue number 3, The Loudest is the Cowardly. Hicks has been drastically changed by her encounter with the Demogorgon, as Jacoby soon discovers while he hunts for the creature alongside her. She is determined to tell the world about what the Russians are doing, and she plans to prove her claims by using Demogorgon's dead body as proof. She is determined to hunt this thing down, and when Jacoby sees the bent bars on the creature's cage down in the cargo bay, he doesn't question her again. They are soon scared by a rat that is squeaking and clambering on the crates near them, but when they finally find it, Hicks shoots it with her shotgun and splatters it into a million pieces. Bram, meanwhile, is smacking the navigation system again and again in order to get it to work. However, when it finally does, she is ambushed by the Demogorgon and killed instantly. Davis and Hudson, meanwhile, are busy checking the lower decks when Hudson tries to get Davis to betray Jacoby. This isn't their fight anymore. They don't have to take orders from Jacoby. Their concern was the Russians, and now that they have been contained, all they need to do is barricade themselves until this entire thing blows over. Before Davis can get on board with this plan, the entire ship is rocked by a huge wave because Bram is no longer at the helm. The ensuing chaos locks Davis behind a door, and, unfortunately, neither Davis nor Hudson can get it open. This is when the creature shows up behind Davis on the other side of the door, and instead of helping his friend, Hudson simply backs away. Kareen, meanwhile, sends her scrawny soldier on an errand to retrieve a device from her quarters. Meanwhile, Hicks and Jacoby have found an incapacitated Hudson on the ground beside the door, and when they look on the other side, they find Davis being ripped to shreds by the Demogorgon. Unlike Hudson, they manage to get the door open, and in retaliation, the creature tears Davis into 2 pieces with his bare hands. Hicks unloads her shotgun into the Demogorgon, and though it makes the creature stagger for a few minutes, it ultimately gets back up a few seconds later to attack her. Jacoby saves her life by firing his pistol, and the two are forced to run out of this section, which is quickly locked by Hudson as soon as they're out. They now realise that the creature is unkillable, and unfortunately for them, we see that Kareen now has her hands on the device she uses to control the creature. She puts it on, activates it, and minutes later, the Demogorgon is breaking down the door to their room in order to free them. Hicks, Jacoby and Hudson, meanwhile, find Bram's dead body and realise only they are the ones alive on the vessel. This is when Jacoby changes his tone. He orders Hudson to get on the comms because they are turning back and going to Alaska. However, this is when Kareen's voice echoes over the radio as she orders Jacoby and his crew to meet her on the deck. The storm rages on as the 3 Russians, along with the Demogorgon, wait for Jacoby and his crew's arrival. Stranger Things. The Voyage, issue number 4, Change in Command. Jacoby is furious. Kareen has the gall to make demands from him after all she has done to his crew. But the deal really is simple from Kareen's perspective. Either Jacoby and the crew take them to Kamchatka or they die. Jacoby threatens to fire at her, but when she calls out his bluff, Hicks pulls the trigger instead and kills Kareen's scrawny private. The creature unleashes itself at them upon Kareen's command, and this is when Hudson steps up to sacrifice himself. He knows he should have helped Davis, but he simply froze, which is why he sees this as his chance at redemption. He orders Jacoby and Hicks to run away, grabs the flare gun near him, and keeps the creature busy by shooting a flare directly into its mouth. This gives Jacoby and Hicks enough time to get away. However, Hudson is slashed and torn into 2 pieces by the Demogorgon. With a bit of time on their hands, Jacoby decides that they need to change their strategy. They will abandon ship, but if they are to buy enough time to get the lifeboat in the water, then they need to start thinking differently. This is their ship after all, and nobody knows it better than them. And so, a few minutes later, we see Kareen's right-hand man scouring the ship in search of Jacoby and Hicks. Along with the Demogorgon, Hicks and Jacoby lead the man and the creature deeper into the ship by making random noises until he is exactly where they want him. Hicks distracts the creature by banging a wrench against the ship, and when Jacoby sees his opportunity, he leaps on top of the Russian armed with a metal rod. After a few missed blows, he manages to knock the man out, and once that is done, Jacoby starts running away with the Demogorgon hot on his heels. Jacoby trips and falls, avoids getting slashed numerous times, but ultimately manages to get out with Hicks. The 2 of them lock the door behind them and use the metal bar to make sure it stays closed. Once that is done, they quickly go back on deck and start preparing the lifeboat. However, this this is when the scrawny private from before ambushes them and seemingly knocks Hicks into the sea. He tries to do the same with Jacoby, but the captain is experienced. He quickly punches the man a couple of times and then knocks him off the ship instead. When he looks down, he finds that thankfully Hicks didn't fall all the way down and managed to grab onto one of the bars. However, Hicks can't hold out for long, and unfortunately, this is when Kareen shows up and holds Jacoby at gunpoint. She got the gun from his cabin, but she doesn't really need it now that the Demogorgon is under her control. After some quick thinking, Jacoby grabs Hicks's hand, shoots down the lifeboat, and once it is in the water, he lets go of Hicks so she can get away. Another crew isn't getting wiped under his command, not when he still has a choice. Kareen gloats and mocks Jacoby for making such a stupid decision, but this is when the captain reveals that he plans to go down with his ship. He kicks Kareen in the legs, knocks her down, and then runs back into the ship. Kareen's gadget dislodges from her head, and with the Demogorgon now on the loose, it quickly attacks and kills her remaining soldier and right-hand man. Kareen cautiously walks into the ship to take care of Jacoby once and for all. However, by the time she notices the spilled gasoline all over the floor, it's already too late. Jacoby reveals himself with a lit flare in his hands, and before Kareen can beg him for mercy, he lets it go and the entire ship succumbs to a huge explosion. However, a few hours later, we see that Kareen managed to survive the explosion and is using a part of the ship to stay afloat. She then gets rescued by a Russian military vessel, and sadly, her story continues. Stranger Things, X Dungeons & Dragons, The Rise of Hellfire. Issue number 1, a new campaign. Eddie Munson is no stranger to weird looks after all. He started off as a weirdo in this school, and though he is back again for another year of torture, there is also a promise of an unforgettable finale, as well as the auspicious beginning of a new adventure. He walks through the crowd of teenagers, clearly hated by most of them, and when he meets up with his friends, they are cringing at his toxically positive attitude. But this year is different, and Eddie promises them that he has made up his mind and that he will be graduating this year. The group is then distracted by one of the older jocks bullying a young kid, and after an intense stare down from Eddie, the jock lets the kid go after he apologizes. Some things never change in this school, and this reminds Eddie of his first day. He would have been bullied too, had it not been for his friend Ronnie, who had hoped that there would likely be some weirdos at the school who liked the same things as them. Back in the present day, Eddie's friend Jeff asked him for a small hint on how their campaign is going to end, and Eddie makes a huge mockery out of it, with claims of unforgettable foes, undefeatable creatures, and unseen horrors. Eddie paints a picture that only gets his friends excited for what comes next. The bell rings, and without giving them any hint whatsoever, Eddie leaves to attend his classes because this year he is going to be a model student. However, as soon as he turns the corner, Eddie holds his face in his hands, and that's because Eddie didn't have anything planned for the finale of their campaign. The weight and pressure of presenting a spectacular finale had unfortunately pushed the inspiration he needed for it far beyond his grasp. We then see Eddie's first day at school again and how he found his new friends during lunch, along with Ronnie. Eddie wasn't much of a talker, and it was Ronnie who dragged him to a table with 3 people who were interested in her Lord of the Rings book. The 4 of them quickly ended up finding common ground over their love for the Lord of the Rings, while Eddie happily munched on his sandwich in the background. This ended up with Ronnie and Eddie getting invited into their unofficial Hellfire Club for playing Dungeons & Dragons after school. Meanwhile, in the present day, Dustin, Lucas and Mike are starting a new year with some much needed confessions now that Eleven and Will have left. Each of them felt a little scared to start the new year, which is why Lucas brought his lucky D20 die, Dustin brought his mini, and Mike brought his Dungeon Master's book. Emboldened and comforted by these confessions, the start of a new year felt a little less daunting to all 3 of them. We then switch back to the past and see Eddie and Ronnie riding their bikes to their first meeting of the Hellfire Club, and though Eddie was scared of the math involved in the game at first, the others reassured him that he was going to have a great time, and thus began his first adventure, and they started off by creating their characters. Ronnie chose to be a halfling, while the Dungeon Master suggested Eddie be a half-orc warrior based on their party's needs. Everything was going according to plan. Eddie rolled looked great on his stats. However, when it was Ronnie's turn, things went south rather quickly. She ended up rolling a lot of nat ones, which means that she would be ducking out of most confrontations. But such is the game of Dungeons & Dragons, it isn't about playing individually, it's about telling a great story together. And so, in their first game, they faced off against a goblin horde, and when Ronnie's character was cornered by a group of goblins, Eddie decided to step in between them and take the hit. The battle raged on for hours until the party finally managed to defeat all the goblins, but their adventure wasn't over. It had just begun, and they had a lot of questions to answer, like where did the goblins come from? Why did they attack this village? And who commands them? This is how Eddie joined the Hellfire Club, and at lunch, he spots his new players when he sees the handbook in Mike's hand at his table. Mike soon begins to be harassed by one of the teachers because of the anti-Dungeons & Dragons propaganda back then. However, this is when Eddie intervenes to save them all. Dungeons & Dragons is all about probability and maths and dice. Surely the teacher wouldn't harass students for maths. That would be counterproductive. The teacher is left speechless after this argument, and though begrudgingly, he leaves the kids alone. And this is when Eddie sits down and says, "So, tell me about your campaign." Stranger Things, X Dungeons & Dragons, The Rise of Hellfire, Issue number 2, Just a Session. Mike shows up to school, dreading what he is going to tell his friends. And, more importantly, worried about what they might have decided. Eddie invited them to play Dungeons & Dragons with the Hellfire Club, and though he wants to join, it feels like betraying his friends. Thankfully, Dustin and Lucas share the same opinion. It was Will who pestered them to play the game last year, and after a perfect end to their campaign, along with Will's and Eleven's departure, it simply feels wrong to play the game without all of their friends. And thus, it's decided they will be turning down Eddie's offer. Back during Eddie's first year, we see how he was bullied by a kid named Doug for liking Dungeons & Dragons. But as the days went by, Doug was invested and interested in their talks and campaign. So much so that one day he asked Eddie if he could join, and Eddie couldn't deny. That day, when Eddie introduced Doug to their dungeon master, Kenny, Doug proudly introduced himself as Dendrick of the Darkwood, an elf warrior with a lot of meat jokes. Everybody laughed, but Kenny applauded Doug's courage, and that's how they found a new member of their party. On the day that Doug joined, their party ventured deep into an abandoned cave where they found the Mace of Disruption proudly displayed. However, the party soon learned that it was protected by a formidable manticore, a creature with a lion's body, bat wings, and a human face. They fought valiantly all day, but in the end, the manticore was too powerful for them, and though Eddie didn't want to, his party eventually convinced him to retreat so that they could live to fight another day. In the present, at lunch, Eddie is busy scribbling in his notebook when the boys show up to talk to him. Dustin and Lucas try to soften the blow, but Mike bluntly tells Eddie that they've decided that they can't join his campaign. Eddie eventually convinced them to tell him why they decided to say no, and this is when we switch back to the past and see that over the next few months, it became Eddie's thing to bring along new players to add to the campaign. This time, it was Stan, and once Stan joined the party, Eddie convinced his party to try to fight the Manticore again. They eventually relented. However, once again, they were forced to flee, this time with Stan the Dwarf protecting them with his shield as they escaped. In the present, Mike, Lucas and Dustin tell him how their last campaign was perfect, how it had the perfect end, and now that their friends Will and Eleven had left, it felt like betrayal joining the other campaign. Eddie briefly tried to prod them about Will and him going missing, but when he learned that it was a touchy subject, he decided to steer clear of it. He knew how the boys were feeling. After all, he had felt the same way once. We are taken to the past again, and this time joining their campaign is Jeff, someone who has played Dungeons & Dragons before. And when Eddie brings up the topic of the Manticore once again, Jeff decides to join him and the party in this venture. After all, if he's going to get killed, better be the first day of his campaign before he gets too invested in his character. The party, however, doesn't want to do the same thing again. However, Eddie manages to convince them with the argument that their laurels and future victories will mean nothing if they know that they were bested by this creature. They need to take it down for their own party's morale, and so they went in to fight the creature again. Things were looking rough, but Eddie was prepared this time. He had been counting the Manticore's tail strikes and his health, and once the creature creature was out of his spikes after striking Eddie's character, the entire party unleashed all their attacks to finally defeat the foe that had bested them twice in the past. What's more is that he gained a new friend in Jeff, who, like him, also played guitar and wanted to jam with his band. And so we see Eddie give a rousing sales pitch to the boys after all. By not playing Dungeons and Dragons anymore, were they truly dishonouring their last campaign and their friends? Or would playing Dungeons and Dragons be the true honour? After all, if every story, every campaign were the same, why would anyone play the game in the first place? This adventure won't be like their last one, and that's the best thing about it and the game in the first place. This sales pitch convinces all three of them. After all, if Eddie is half as good a DM as the salesman he is, then they're in for a fantastic adventure. And so it's decided the boys will join Eddie's game for a single session to assess if they want to continue or not. Stranger Things, X Dungeons and Dragons, The Rise of Hellfire, issue number 3, Every Story Needs a Villain. The next day, Lucas, Dustin and Mike are happily having lunch with Eddie, but when they try to go back to classes, one of the high school seniors stops them and gives them some unsolicited advice. She tells them about Eddie and how he's bad company because he is a suspected drug user, dealer, and a criminal who likely shot someone on the West Coast. She goes on to assassinate Eddie's character in front of the boys, and though there are a lot of holes in her story, this sows a seed of doubt in their minds regardless. This is when we switch to the past and see the end of a day's play in Eddie's campaign. His party was fighting a huge band of raiders that attacked their village out of nowhere. After completing the day's game, as they were discussing what to do next, Eddie proposed the idea that the raiders are likely here for something important. Why else would they attack a random small village? However, this seemingly innocent suggestion was used by Vince to attack Eddie, as he implied that Eddie would know a lot about being a thief, considering his background and past. Everyone went silent, and after a minute, Eddie confronted Vince, who went on to talk about the rumours he had heard about the Munson family and how it was frankly deplorable for Kenny to allow someone like Eddie to join their campaign. Eddie naturally stormed out, and though Ronnie followed him and tried to make him feel better, Eddie was hurt. Because Vince wasn't a nobody. He was one of them, one of the players. He had been at the table longer than they had, which meant this wasn't their place anymore. This used to be their game, but not anymore. Meanwhile, the boys discuss once again if they're going to join Eddie's campaign now that they know about rumours, and even though they may be rumours, they matter because they change people's perception. Lucas, for one, is extremely conflicted because he thinks that hanging out with Eddie might hurt his chances of joining the basketball team. Back in the past, at their next session, we see that Eddie was a tad bit late, and Vince used this opportunity to nastily remark that he might be out somewhere stealing a car. However, Eddie showed up for the game, and this is when Kenny introduced a new monster to have his friends play together, and to have Vince see that he was in the wrong. The monster he introduced was an Umber Hulk, and when it cornered Vince's character in a corner, everyone decided to save the villagers. Instead, Vince was panicking, and as Eddie is reminded of this memory in the present day, he tells us that being a dungeon master is more than crafting a story. It's about creating experiences, shaping story arcs, and, more importantly, teaching lessons that might be hard for some to learn. That day after school ended, we saw Max shunning Lucas away when he tried to check up on her. This is when Eddie gave him a bit of advice. Max was hurting, and hurting people usually lash out at the ones closest to them. In this case, what Lucas needs to do is simply be there for Max, and when she doesn't need him, he needs to hold back. We then see that in the past, it was only Eddie who stepped in to save Vince, and in the process, he ended up sacrificing his 2-year-long character. But Vince was as thankless as ever, and when Ronnie lashing out at him wasn't enough to get him to stop, Kenny put his foot down and slammed his fists on the table. He gave Vince one last chance to behave himself, and when he didn't, Kenny simply told him to get out. The message was clear, but Kenny wasn't handing out any trophies. Eddie's character won't be revived, but he gets to create a new one and start an adventure with them once again. And so, that day after school, Dustin and Mike show up for Eddie's campaign as promised. And though Lucas is not here, it throws them off for a while, but he shows up minutes later and joins them on the adventure. And thus, with 3 new players at his table, Eddie can finally begin his adventure once again. Stranger Things X Dungeons and Dragons The Rise of Hellfire, issue number 4, I Use. The first day of the boys' game session with Eddie was intense. There was fear, and then the feeling of victory when Mike dealt the final blow. They had saved the village and defeated the goblins, but when they got too overzealous, Eddie used this opportunity to tease the end of his campaign and how the road ahead of them was full of thorns. This made his players anticipate the end, but it also made Eddie panic because he still didn't have a fitting end for his finale. He was disappointed and dismayed as he was about to exit the school, and this is when he was reminded of his campaign from his high school. Ronnie and Eddie couldn't believe that they had made it this far, had played for almost 3 years, and that it would be sad to see Kenny leave and no longer be their dungeon master. Regardless, they were all looking forward to the end, and Kenny did deliver. The party started off by defeating an orc army amidst a recently ruined castle. They used all they had at their disposal, even their tried and tested strategy of wheels of steel, and by the end of it, they had defeated them all. However, little did they know that this was the beginning of what the demigod Iuz had planned all along. The orc army was a nice sacrifice to boost his powers, but with this reveal, Eddie and the rest of the players realised that Iuz was their true foe. This is when Eddie walks out in the present day. He sees Lucas, Dustin and Mike hanging out with his other friends, and he is once again reminded why he loves Dungeons and Dragons so much. He goes back home without interrupting them, and on the way back, he remembers the rest of the battle, how Ius made quick work of all his friends, and how he quickly dispatched Ronnie's character with a single spell. Only Eddie's new character was left standing, and, though he was still alive, the rest of the players didn't really have high hopes for him. After all Eddie could do was really die like a hero, and that is exactly what he planned to do. So after a rousing speech and denouncing Ius's demigod's ways, Eddie's character dropped his sword and pulled out the Mace of Disruption instead. Eddie knew his character would die, but so would Ius if he managed to hit him, and though Eddie needed 95 or higher to hit Ius, when he rolled 100, everyone rejoiced when they realised they had defeated their last, most formidable foe, even in death. In the present, however, Eddie still struggles to find a fitting end for his campaign. This is when he is reminded of how he became the Hellfire Club's dungeon master in the first place. After the game, Kenny had pulled him aside and had handed all his Dungeons and Dragons books to him. Eddie was surprised. He was the only player who died twice in the campaign. Why did Kenny think he deserved to be the dungeon master? And this is when Kenny laughed and reminded him that it's because Eddie knows how to tell a good story and that he isn't afraid to sacrifice his characters for the sake of it. What's more is that Kenny knows Eddie planned to use the Mace of Disruption in the end, which is the reason why he made his second character a paladin. Thus, through this memory, Eddie is reminded once again that before anything else, Dungeons and Dragons is all about having fun. And so the next day, Eddie finally comes up with the next big villain for the final arc of his campaign, Vecna, and thus begins another new adventure for our heroes once again.